इथे 10चा टायमिंग काढला त्याच्यामध्ये असं जाऊ शकतो शक्यता आहे 10 बरोबर पडते हे पहिले टाकून देऊ याच्या कॉपी स्क्रीन लिंक करून तुम्हाला जे जे विचारते त्यांना आपण पाठवतो इतकं प्रॉब्लेम हे जे आहे नवीन नवीन कॉपी ज्यांना पाहिजे पाठवू शकतो याच्यात झालं व्हॉट्सअपवर जावं लागेल आपण
Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I am fine, sir. Good morning,
Very good.
Mr.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning to all of you.
How are you, sir, today?
Oh, doing good. As good as it can be, I guess.
It
Yeah.
is great to see you actually on both days, and this is one of the benefits of this pandemic. I think that we
I
can see
know.
people
Yeah, I
without
know.
traveling.
That's correct. I agree. So, how are things?
Things are good. Things are good. It's raining here in Mumbai,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
but Corona situation on campus is under control.
Okay, that is a good thing. Very good.
Because last 10 days, I think there is no case on campus.
Oh, that is a very good thing. Absolutely good. But your classes have not started, right? You are doing only online.
Yes, this whole semester we are going to do online.
Okay, all right.
And only PhD students will be called in a
Okay.
phased manner from
Okay.
this month on. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Uh-huh.
How you are taking care of practicals, Suvanji?
No practical. So we have
No.
moved some theory courses this semester, and the practical courses are moved next semester.
Yes. You shifted the code.
Yes.
Good morning, Mishraji, Prashantji.
So, sir, this Professor Sivaswarup, I wanted him to meet you actually in person sometime. So he is the regional director of IGNOU,
Oh,
Indira
that is
Gandhi
very good.
University.
Yes.
Yes.
Nagpur.
And
Okay.
he is a very he's a very person who is connected to all the student fraternity in this area, Nagpur,
Wonderful,
Chandrapur,
wonderful. Very
Paravai
good.
area,
Uh-huh.
and fellow of RSC, works for RSC, and is very passionate, like just like you.
Don't worry.
So whenever we have to do any event,
Oh,
Nagpur area, we catch hold of him.
excellent. That's very good. I guess you need to have somebody like that to kind of get things going. Yeah.
Yes.
Very true. Yeah.
Sir, at the first, I should thank Suvarn and Deepa and others from the RSC.
Yeah.
And so that they also encourage it, because there are people like this. Today's program, students of Yavatmal and other places,
Correct, correct, correct.
This semester, and a practical
they don't get a chance to meet to you, listen to you. Otherwise,
Maybe another time, maybe I'll certainly come there, I guess. When things become better, normal, I hope.
yes.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Morning, Professor Mishra. Yeah.
So, sir, this Professor Sivaswarup, I wanted him to meet you actually in person sometime. Sir, one thing, I'm getting the echo of what I have said like few minutes back. I'm getting it back.
मिश्रा जी देखिए ये YouTube का तो आवाज नहीं आ रहा है, ये को आ
Yes,
रहा है।
I think it's giving a feedback of YouTube
हाँ,
recording.
इसमें YouTube का बंद करना है।
All the student fraternity in this area,
Wonderful.
part of area, and do you hear this?
Yes, yes, ये को आ रहा है।
Correct. There is an echo.
The one like what I spoke like 1 minute ago, it is getting
Coming up. Excellent. Again, we need to have.
मिश्रा जी देख लीजिए, YouTube को बंद करना है इसमें। ये को आ रहा है। First, I should thank Suvarn and Deepa and others from the RSC.
Yeah.
And so that they also encourage, because there are people like this. Today's program, students of Yavatmal and other places.
Correct, correct, correct.
They don't get a chance to meet you, listen to you. Otherwise,
Maybe another time, maybe I'll certainly come there, I guess. When things become better, normal, I hope.
yes.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Mishra. The echo is coming again. Yeah.
yeah, the same thing is played back.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this is something is getting recorded on YouTube. So that we hear again.
YouTube का तो आवाज नहीं आ रहा है।
Yes.
नानी माधुरी जी का बंद कर।
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, that comes back. Yeah. I also could hear my voice after a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Now it's good.
Is it okay now?
Looks like, yes.
All right.
Seems-
At least we don't, get back our own voice after some time. It's be powerful.
Yes. Namaste, Madhuri ji.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, Ms. Madhuri. Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Namaste, sir. तो येऊन राहिला.
Madhuri, can you speak again a little bit? Because I think your speaker is giving echo. We can adjust that.
Good morning.
Yeah, this is, see,
Okay, sir.
No, there's an echo coming.
3-4 times, so it is reverberating.
Yeah, there's an echo coming, all right.
But for others, the echo is not coming. So it's only for your speaker it is we are getting. So please check that.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, yours
Yours
is perfect.
is my okay, my voice is okay.
Maybe somewhere YouTube is running.
Ah, okay.
हॅलो
Yeah.
हो 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 हो
हा आता ठीक आहे फक्त बारीक आहे मॅडम
थोडं लाऊडली बोला
Okay, 10 o'clock. How many participants? We already have 40 participants.
Oh, 40 there. Yep. How many are supposed to be coming or participating?
Center on है.
Sir, there are some 300 plus registration. Slowly, I think people will join in another
Oh, that is
15
okay.
minutes or so. So
Right,
during,
right.
once our inauguration is over, probably.
Yeah, take care. Suran, my picture there is about 30 years old.
I think same. Mine is also some 10, 15 years old. Yes. Probably they took from the website,
Yeah.
from old website. Yes.
Yeah.
Shall we start, sir? It's 10 o'clock.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, I think you should.
Yes, please.
Fine.
Yes.
You can do that. Yeah.
हाँ मुस्कावर सर करा शुरू.
Yes, sir. Good morning, one and all. Myself, Dr. Prashant Muskavar, on the behalf of management of the Institute Amalkshan Mahidhyalaya Yavatmal and collaborators Royal Society of Chemistry, Western India section, and Indira Gandhi National Open University, Nagpur Regional Center. I welcome you all in this webinar. As you know, COVID-19 situation, all of us are locked in the homes. Scientists, professors, as well as research students, we lost our day-to-day connectivity. In this pandemic situation, online workshop, conferences, and symposium is the only solution to connect with each other. So by keeping in mind, we are conducting this webinar on latest development in green chemistry, which will be very much useful for all researchers working in this area. In this webinar, we have invited three eminent scientists as a speaker. Professor S. Chandrasekharan sir, Department of Chemistry, IISc Bangalore, is going to talk on chemistry for sustainable development. Then Professor Suvarna S. Kulkarni sir, Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay, West India section, RSC, is going to deliver a lecture on green chemistry in carbohydrate synthesis. Then Sam Gupta sir, Department of Chemistry, IISER Kolkata, is going to speak about the bioinspire catalysis for the sustainable future. Now I request all of you, please stand up for national anthem.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, one and all.
You.
Now I request our honorable principal of our college, Dr. R.M. Mishra sir, say a few words about this college and webinar. R.M. Mishra sir.
Good morning, everybody. I welcome Dr. Suvarna Kulkarni, Dr. Shyam Sen Gupta, Dr. Chandrasekharan, and Dr. Shivaswarup for this national webinar. Dear resource person and students, I, on behalf of organizers and college, welcomes you in the national webinar organized by the college in association with Royal Society of Chemistry and Indira Gandhi National Open University, Nagpur Regional Center. My special thanks to Dr. Shivaswarup, Regional Director of IGNOU, Nagpur, for his efforts in allocating this webinar to our institution. I am also thankful to Dr. Deepa Khushalani for her efforts in planning and coordinating the host institution and the resource person. Friends, the college was established by the society in 1956 in order to provide quality education to the learner in tribal region of the Maharashtra. The college was started initially in the More Bhavan of the town with 40 students only in the academic session 1956-57. Now there are 7,000 students learning from UG, PG and doctoral courses. The college was affiliated earlier to the Nagpur University, Nagpur. Now the college has well-established building, laboratories, library, playgrounds for boys as well as girls, spread over 39 acres of land. The college is providing education to the students from HSC, graduation in arts, commerce and science, post-graduation in arts, economics, history, political science, English, Marathi and Hindi, commerce and science, chemistry, mathematics and physics. The college is affiliated now to Sant Gadge Baba Amravati University, Amravati since 1983. The foundation stone of the college was laid on the 1st February 1958 at the hands of Sri Yashwantrao Chauhan, then Chief Minister of Mumbai State. The college was blessed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and he inaugurated the science faculty of the college on 18th April 1959. It is a privileged thing that the foundation stone of the building was laid at the hands of both these stalwarts. Today, the college has acquired a prestigious position not only in Vidarbha, but in the entire Maharashtra. The Golden Jubilee of the college was celebrated with the auspicious blessings of His Excellency Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, Honorable President of India, His Excellency Sri Bhairav Singh Shekhawat, Honorable Vice President of India, and Her Excellency Srimati Pratibha Patil, Honorable President of India, also visited the institution. Over a period of time, the college has expanded the areas of study with concise attempt for adding the employability to the courses. Several students of the college have acquired prominence in different fields of education. The management of the college is making every possible effort to face new challenges of every expanding world of the knowledge and enable the students to live a life with material advancement and spiritual enrichment. Today's webinar on green chemistry may found useful to attendees, including in inculcating knowledge base in the subject. I welcome all the three resource persons and wish every success to this webinar. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mishra sir. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Dr. P. Swarup sir, Regional Director, IGNOU, Nagpur Regional Center, say a few words on this occasion and RSC activities in the Vidarbhas. Dr. Swarup sir.
Good morning to you all. Respected Professor Chandrasekharan sir, Professor Suvan Kulkarni, Professor Sen Gupta, Dr. Manohar Mishra ji, Chandrasekharan, all other friends and all the participants. It's a pleasure to have this Royal Society of Chemistry activity in Vidarbha through this digital medium. And I should thank at the outset Professor Suvan Kulkarni and Professor Deepa Kushlani for making this event possible with their initiative and planning everything. And I should thank the Royal Society of Chemistry West India section for giving us opportunity every year to organize such programs. And since 2011, we have been having every year a program at Nagpur. And we celebrated the International Year of Chemistry, and since then, without break, we are having various activities. In Nagpur also, we have in association with various colleges like Institute of Science, Nagpur University, SFS College, Shivaji Science College, and so many colleges we organized. And not only at Nagpur, we go to Vidarbha, different places, because we feel that students should be benefited in the outreach activities of this Royal Society of Chemistry. And I talked to the colleges, like for this event, I spoke to Professor Mishra for having this activity in their college so that their students will be maximum benefited. This is a national webinar and we have students from all across the country. Similarly, we had programs in Gadchiroli also in Gondwana University. There also around 200 girls mostly. They attended, the science students. We had the program in Gondia also, DB Science College. So every year we organize, and at this moment I thank again the Royal Society of Chemistry, especially the West India chapter. Like Professor Suvan Kulkarni is always positive and coming forward for all such activities. And thankful to you, and I thank Dr. Mishra and his team for organizing this event with all enthusiasm. I wish that students and the participants will be benefited with the stalwarts in the field who are going to address the sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiv sir. Thank you very much. Now I request Professor Suvarna S. Kulkarni sir, working in the Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay, West India Section RSC, say a few words about the RSC. Professor
Thank you,
Kulkarni, sir.
Prashantji. Yeah, it's indeed a great pleasure for me to be here. I would have liked to personally come to Yavatmal. I like to visit Vidarbha and Nagpur area and always have enjoyed meeting Professor Shiva Swarup. But nevertheless, it is a great thing that we are able to arrange our first event in Yavatmal, and that too in a very prestigious Amolak Chand College. So we are very grateful to you on behalf of RSC, to your college, to Professor Ram Manohar Mishra, the principal, and especially Professor Shiva Swarup, the regional director of IGNOU, for organizing this on behalf of RSC and having this event. Our ultimate hope is that such kind of activities will benefit the student community, as he rightly said. And due to this webinar, I was just talking to Sir Chandrasekhar sir that nowadays, although the pandemic is a big calamity, but these webinars have brought many people together and closer. Because if I have to invite Professor Chandrasekharan to come to Yavatmal, we'll have to talk to him many months in advance, because he will have to spend 2 days to come all the way from Bangalore, stay here and go back, which is now, this is possible because he doesn't have to travel and he can adjust 1 hour from his busy schedule. So we are also thankful to both the speakers today, and I look forward to this exciting event. But before we begin, I have to do 2 important duties. Speak a few words about RSC West India activities, and I'm going to be very brief. And if you have any questions, you can always reach us and write to us, and I will let you more about it. And then I will introduce Professor Chandrasekharan to start today's event. So RSC West India section, RSC, I don't need to give an introduction to Royal Society of Chemistry, London. RSC, under RSC London, we have RSC India office in Bangalore. And then under that RSC India office, we have 4 sections. And one of the major sections is RSC West India section. In West India section, we have about, we have our council where we have 7 committee members: Deepa Kuslani, Ruchi Anand, Ravi Venkat Ramani, Professor Girjesh Govil. Then we have Ramakrishna Bhatt, and we have Lakshmi Ravi Shankar, and myself. So this is our council. And what we do, so RSC empowers us to conduct activities on their behalf, and we in advance, 1 year in advance, we schedule our events and send it to RSC. We budget those events, and then RSC funds us for these outreach events. And what kind of events we sponsor? So we only sponsor student related activities. We don't normally sponsor for conferences, but we sponsor all the students activities such as outreach seminars, such as summer schools. One prominent activity that we do at IIT Bombay under RSC is the summer school, where we invite students from all across Maharashtra, and we offer them accommodation on campus for 10 days, and we teach them practicals and give them lectures at MSc level. So such kind of activities are sponsored by us. And so typically we conduct about 10 to 15 activities in a year, and we are very choosy about the activities. And we like to have a spread across Maharashtra. So definitely we want each year we would like to have some activities in Nagpur, Vidarbha, Yavatmal, which is an important region for us. So again, on behalf of RSC, I would like to thank the college, Principal Ram Manohar Mishra, then Shiva Swarupji, yourself, Professor Prashant Mustavar, for convening this event, and Madhuri Bade, who is the organizing secretary for this event. So with this brief words, now let's move on to the main program. And I'm really privileged and I'm extremely happy to get this honor of introducing our guru, Professor Srinivasan Chandrasekaran, who is honorary professor at IISc. And although I am not fortunate to directly get his tutelage, I never got the chance to learn under him, but I'm benefited by over last several years due to his guidance, due to his support, and his direction. So we are very glad, sir, that you accepted our invitation. And although he doesn't need an introduction for the benefit of student community, I would like to give elaborate introduction about Professor Chandrasekaran. So Professor Srinivasan Chandrasekaran, he was born in 1945, and he earned his BSc and master's degree from Vivekananda College from University of Madras in Chennai. He obtained his PhD in 72 in Department of Organic Chemistry, University of Madras, again working with a very famous chemist at that time, Professor S. Swaminathan, and he worked in the area of oxycope rearrangement and studies on the synthesis of novel Norbornene derivatives. Then he moved to Harvard University, and I'm not sure whether he was the first one to go to Harvard, because anyway, it is always difficult to get admission in Harvard. And not only Harvard, he went on to work in Harvard with all-time stalwart Professor E.J. Corey, who is a great guru of organic synthesis, who gave us the gift of retrosynthesis. So Professor Chandrasekaran worked with him as a research associate, and he worked on the first successful synthesis of gibberellic acid. There were many attempts at that time, and theirs was the first successful synthesis, gibberellic acid, which is a plant growth hormone. And later on, he worked as a scientist at Syntex Research Laboratory in Palo Alto in California, so both coasts, East and West Coast, before coming back to India. And at Palo Alto, he worked on the synthesis of beta-lactam antibiotics. So with this background, he returned to the main hub of chemistry at that time was IIT Kanpur. So he joined IIT Kanpur in 1977 as a lecturer in Department of Chemistry. And he started his work in the area of development of new synthetic methodologies related to oxidative transformation, synthesis of insect pheromones, and novel molecular rearrangements. In 1989, he moved to Department of Organic Chemistry, Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where he later on served as the chairman of the department and chairman of the Division of Chemical Sciences and Dean, Faculty of Sciences. Presently, he is an INSA distinguished professor at IISc Bangalore. Now, his major research contributions are in the area of development of new synthetic methodologies, as many of you would know. In synthesis of natural products and catalysis, he has also worked on carbohydrates. He has published over 250 research articles in international journals. And over the last 4 decades, he has mentored more than 100 co-workers, and several of those are PhD and postdoc candidates, and graduate students, project assistant, postdoctoral fellows, and in addition, he has mentored several master students. Professor Chandrasekaran has served on board of studies of several universities and on the research council of many CSIR laboratories. What is more important is that, green chemistry, when green chemistry was introduced in India, a Department of Science and Technology, a government of India at that point of time formulated a task force to initiate work on green chemistry in India. And we are so glad to have Professor Chandrasekaran, because he was the chairman of that task force to start things rolling in India about green chemistry. So he's the exact correct person to talk about this topic with us today. And he was chairman of the Committee on Funds for Improvement of S&T Infrastructure, that is FIST in DST, also member of Council of Indian National Science Academy, INSA. He was the elected member of Bureau and Executive Committee of the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, IUPAC, and was the chairman of National Committee of IUPAC in INSA. He served as the Secretary and Treasurer of Indian Academy of Science, Bangalore, and President of the Chemical Research Society of India. He also has received Doctor of Science honoris causa of North Bengal University, Siliguri in 2011. Professor Chandrasekharan has been awarded with several awards, and I will just list a few before giving dais to him. So Professor Chandrasekharan was awarded the most coveted award, one of the early recipients of Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in 1989. Then Basudev Banerjee Memorial Medal of Indian Chemical Society. Then also very honorable medal, the Silver Medal of CRSI. He received Jawaharlal Nehru Bird Centenary Lecture Award, Golden Jubilee Commemoration Medal of INSA, then Alumni Award of Excellence of IISc, and then J.C. Bose National Fellowship of DST, and SCRB Distinguished Fellowship. He's a fellow of all major academies. He is a fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore, Indian National Science Academy, New Delhi, and World Academy of Sciences, Italy, that is TWAS. So with this introduction, I would like to express my thanks on behalf of the organizing committee to Professor Chandrasekharan. Thank you very much, sir. We are really privileged to have you, and we are really looking forward. Sorry for taking a lot of your time, but you still have your 45 minutes, and we are looking forward to your talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kulkarni. I'm indeed very happy to be here this morning to participate in this national webinar on green chemistry, sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, West India section, IGNOU Nagpur, and hosted by Amlak Chand's Mahavidyalaya Nagpur. I am given to understand that a very large number of undergraduate and postgraduate students of chemistry are attending this program, and I wish them all the best. I would like to, before I start, I would like to thank Professor Kulkarni, Professor Shiv Swarup, and Professor Mishra for efficient coordination of this webinar. See, all of us are chemists. We study chemistry. We are very familiar with the normal sub-disciplines of chemistry, which is organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry, etc. Therefore, one might be kind of tempted to ask the question, is this green chemistry that you are talking about, is it a different branch of chemistry? Is it different? If you ask me that question, in my point of view, the answer is no. While the basic principles of chemistry that we all study, we apply, are generally the same. It doesn't change anything, except how you apply these basic principles of chemistry towards sustainability, towards sustainable future, so that what we do today would that be beneficial for the future generation. Therefore, in that sense, green chemistry, or what we normally refer to as sustainable chemistry, is essentially a change of mindset, essentially actual practice, putting things in real practice, which is of good use to mankind. That's basically what it is. Therefore, in this lecture, I thought I will probably share with you how is this chemistry related to scientific, the so-called sustainable development, and what are the genesis, what is the historical evolution, development of green chemistry over the last 4 decades, what are the guiding principles of green chemistry, and probably I can illustrate with a few examples both for a laboratory as well as for industrial practice, because this is going to be very important. Ultimately, what we do in chemistry today, the kind of product that we give out of chemistry, you will have to see whether the future generation will thank us for what we did or will blame us for what we did. That basically is what one worries about in terms of green chemistry. Therefore, you would see green chemistry is not a different chemistry. It is what I would call as chemistry with a difference, right? It is at this stage I thought I will probably begin from the beginning. I will probably start sharing my presentation and share my screen with you now, just in a minute or so. Can you see my presentation now? I hope it's okay. Fine.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Okay, this is what we are going to be really doing. Is what is this we call as chemistry for sustainable development. See, all of us. Sorry. Yes. See, we are in chemistry, you have to remember chemistry is both a central science, enabling science, and I would also call it as a mother science, because from chemistry there are a large number of other disciplines in science have evolved. For example, what we see as molecular biology today, what we see as material chemistry today, they all essentially evolved out of chemistry in that sense. Chemistry therefore plays a key role in conquering diseases, solving energy problems, environmental problems, and in fact actually led to a lot of discoveries that lead to new industries, new materials, and new technologies, and so on. If you really want to be doing chemistry and you want to be successful in chemistry, one thing that you have to remember, you have to have creativity, because simply adding a few things, incremental additions to existing knowledge will not be of great use unless your contributions arise from creativity. Therefore, that is one of the most important facets of making something meaningful and important in chemistry. The second aspect that I probably would stress today is how do you as a chemist contribute to sustainability and human well-being. These are our two major concerns in the world today. Therefore, I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about in what way that chemistry is going to be related to sustainability, in what way we can contribute to sustainability. Therefore, the question that you ask is, what is sustainability? The concept of sustainable development actually emerged almost 45 years ago in response to a growing realization the need to balance economic and social progress with concern for the environment and stewardship of natural resources, that is. Because we always have to think in terms of what are the natural resources available to us, how judiciously we use them, and therefore if we actually make use of them indiscriminately, what we will leave behind for the future generation will be a big question. If we will be aware of that part. Because of this, in 2002, the United Nations General Assembly had a summit. At that time, they declared the years 2005 to 2040, that decade, as a decade for education for sustainable development. So that period has gone now. But what is it that is important for sustainable development? There are three. This is sustainability right in the middle that you see here. There are three important facets to sustainable development. One would you call as environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable. What do we mean by that part? Whatever we do today in chemistry, you will have to make sure that we are not polluting the environment. We are not doing it in such a way that leads to diseases, and other difficulties that one will face in the for mankind. Therefore, whatever we do today, the product that we develop in chemistry will have to be environmentally sustainable for a period of time. That is important. That's the first thing. The second thing that we worry about is if you develop a process, come up with some product that is going to be given to the people to use. But if it is not economically viable, if it is too expensive, nobody will buy, nobody will use. Therefore, what you do, make in the laboratory for production, for use by people, it has to be an economically viable process. Therefore, it has to be economically sustainable. The third aspect of that you will realize is even important is it is socially sustainable. What we mean by that is the process, the product that you give away and people start using it. Will it last for a long period of time? Will people continue to use it after 10 years, after 15 years? The acceptability by the public becomes an important question. If people throw it away saying this is not very good, it is not acceptable, and so on, then the whole process comes to a nothing. Therefore, these are the three important facets of environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability are the key factors. And as chemists, we will have to make sure that we contribute to this sustainability development in that sense. And if you now talk about what are the kind of challenges, we are in the 21st century now. You might ask the question, what are the major issues? There are a very large number of issues that we face. Even, for example, today we face the pandemic of COVID-19. We don't have a solution. We don't have a vaccine. We are in the process of developing things. There are many, many things that are there. But you can look at the population as a problem. Energy is a problem. Global change, resource depletion, food supply, toxic in the environment. All these are serious problems facing mankind in the 21st century. But of all the major problems that one looks at, to me, there are two important challenges that have to be solved, that need to be addressed with top priority. This is what you would refer to as two E's. One is energy and other one is environment. And both of them you will realize immediately are key things for development, economic and other kinds of development for any world, anywhere. And therefore, these two E have to be addressed. And as chemists, we have an important role to play as to how we can actually contribute towards energy as well as environment. So for example, if you look at the energy consumption throughout the world over a period of, say, last about 100 years, you will realize very large percentage. You see here, this is oil, coal, gas. This basically constitute more than 80% of our consumption of energy. And that means there is very, very small percentage is by hydroelectric power, nuclear power, thermal power, wind energy, and renewable energy. All these constitute an extremely small percentage of our energy resources, which means very large percentage of energy that we use today, they come from fossil fuel to a large extent, which are nature's gift to mankind. They will not last for long. They probably will last for, say, for example, coal, oil, etc. These are all probably evolved over a period of millions of years. And now if you indiscriminately use them today, your future generation after about 50 years or maybe 100 years, there may not be anything left for them to use. Therefore, as chemists, as scientists in general, and as a chemist in particular, we will have to see as to how we can contribute to what you would call as renewable energy sources that you can come up with. And that is an important part that you all have to remember. Another important thing that we all probably are familiar with, the so-called concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You can see here, over a period of again 100 years or so, you will see this back in this year, you can find originally the concentration or in parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the order of about 300 parts per million. And now in 2020, we see approximately is around 410, 420 parts per million. You might say, well, there is not much really. There is a gradual change. What you have to remember, there is a gradual increase, very slow, very steady increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, starting from, say, about 320 a few years ago, now to about 410, 420 parts per million. You may not think it is a major change, but you will have to remember that based on what we see, this is the one which has led to global warming. Therefore, it has become serious consequences that arise out of global warming that you have to be aware of. Therefore, that is something you have to see what can be done. And very often one talks about global warming and climate because there is related to climate change as well. So whenever one talks about this, then normally one gives an anecdote of some kind so that you know the seriousness of what we are looking at. See, the boiling frog story is something which is very often told in common parlance to everywhere in the scientific circle. This anecdote describes a frog and boiling water. What do you mean by this? If, for example, you take a frog and try to throw it in boiling water, you know the frog senses it is too hot. Therefore, it immediately senses it is too hot and therefore it jumps out of the vessel which contains the hot water. On the other hand, you take a frog, put it in a vessel containing cold water, and you start heating it very, very slowly. All right? Which means then you don't see there is a change is taking place. It is too slow. But the problem is because you are in a comfort zone, you're thinking everything around us is fine. But suddenly when the temperature goes beyond the point, which cannot, suddenly it wakes up and it finds it's too late to jump out. And at that point, it probably will die. Therefore, this is more like a metaphor. The metaphor that we say because people very often react to significant changes that occur gradually, because when it occurs very small, slowly, gradually over a period of time, we don't notice it at all. That exactly is what has happened to the carbon dioxide concentration, where the increase in concentration of carbon dioxide in atmosphere is slow but steady, but has eventually led to global warming and climate change. Therefore, it's a very appropriate kind of thing you have to remember. If whenever there are small changes, we probably ignore those changes, and eventually it leads to a serious problem for all of us. At this stage, we will have to see, because we today talk about green chemistry or sustainable chemistry, we have to say as to how did it evolve over a period of time? What is the historical development, genesis of the thing that we see today? I would probably look at them as three phases in the development of public awareness, outrage at the impact of industrial pollution of the environment. For example, if you go back to before the 1960s, for example, all right? Before the 1960s, there is virtually no environmental regulation. There are no environmental protection agencies, even in the Western world. Use of disposal of chemicals, nobody bothered about them. Public were essentially in deep slumber, deep sleep. They were blissfully unaware of the problems of pollution to the environment, and mostly unaware of the environmental effects of pollution. That means you are in deep sleep, you are not willing to wake up because you don't know what is going on. Therefore, that is what is happening up to the 1960s. To give you an example, the way chemistry was practiced many years ago, I give you an example of this, a paper that was published in 1859, almost 150 years ago in Annalen der Chemie. So this is something illustrates an early chemist exploring the class of compound known as isocyanate. All of you studying chemistry and organic chemistry, you know about the functional group known as the RNC group is an isocyanate group. At that time, 150 years ago, when Lietike was trying to look at this compound, he didn't know about the compound, what are the properties, whether it is good or bad, nothing. But he was trying to make this, and it has a foul odor, difficult problem. And so he could not conduct experiments in the laboratory. And when it became unbearable, because those days we did not have fume cupboards in the laboratory. So at that time, he thought it is very difficult to do experiments with this isocyanate in the lab. And therefore, he decided to move out and outdoors, go outside the laboratory to the street and start doing the experiment there. He thought that the fumes will go away. Therefore, it will be no problem. It worked for a while. However, he had to stop doing work outside because the neighbors around started complaining there is a toxic smell, foul smell coming out, and it is difficult for us to live in this neighborhood. And therefore, at that point in time, he had to abandon the work with isocyanate and completely stop doing things. So therefore, this is the way chemistry was practiced. You have to remember 150 years ago. That was the problem. Again, another thing that you have to remember, this is also around the same time in 1860, published in the Journal of the Chemical Society by Guthrie. He was the discoverer of the mustard gas. Many of you probably have heard of mustard gas. It is a sulfur-containing sulfide compound, a potent blistering agent. Actually, it was used as a chemical warfare agent in World War I. Guthrie, for example, reported the terrible effects of a newly prepared compound because he didn't know. He prepared this mustard gas and he was trying to look at the properties of this. Would it smell? What would it be? Or can you taste it? And what taste would it have? Because this is the way chemistry was done those days. And he found, trying to kind of sniff it, trying to take it to your nose and smear the smell and see what it smells like. Although in the present day context, you cannot and probably should not be doing things of that kind in the chemistry laboratory because one does not know what kind of a thing that can harm it can do you. And also at that point in time, the so-called in keeping with the sound organic chemical practice of that time, 150 years ago, he decided he also would taste the compound and see what it tastes like. Again, what you would call as a very dangerous thing to do. Certainly something it cannot be done in the present day context. And you have to remember that is the way chemistry was practiced, chemistry was evolved, chemistry was developed in the early days. And then we come to the next period, the second phase of the development of green chemistry is the period between 1960 to 1990. This is the period already you have the print media was very active, newspapers, magazines have been very popular, and also the TV or the visual media also became very popular. Therefore, people, common man could actually get information about things that happen not only in his town, but elsewhere in the country, outside the country, and so on and so forth. It is during this period of 1960 to 1990, a series of well-publicized events focused the public's attention on the risk associated with or the use, disposal of what you would call as hazardous chemicals. Because somewhere there is an explosion, somewhere there is a fire, somewhere there are a few people died, some people are injured, and so on and so forth. You get to know about this through newspapers and the TV. Then people come to know. It is around this time in the 1960s, there is a scientist by name Rachel Carson. She's an extremely courageous woman. She did not live for too long. She actually, from 1907 to 1964, she passed away. But what is important is, this is Rachel Green that you see here, Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson wrote a very important book at that time called The Silent Spring. And some of you have the time, you should probably read this book because she was the crusader for the indiscriminate use of pesticide and insecticide that were used at that time, particularly DDT. Many of you probably read about DDT in your organic chemistry textbooks. And very often it turns out what we use for agricultural production, the pesticides are sprayed in the field and it also ends up in the food chain. Therefore, the product that you buy from the supermarket contains traces of DDT that can actually have health issues for people who consume the food. So Rachel Carson was the first one to bring home this point that these kind of chemicals, when you indiscriminately use them, it can actually create problem for health of people. So she was the first one to alert the public to the hazards of pesticide. And therefore, the Silent Spring, she wrote about banning DDT. Because of that time, the government of that day, they decided they will ban the use of DDT in the agricultural field. That is the action that was taken. Now, another tragedy that took place, what is known as the Love Canal tragedy, this actually happened around the 1970s, not too long ago. You're talking about 50 years ago. Actually, Love Canal is something which is a small village near American side of the Niagara Falls. And in the very early days, they had a lot of chemical factories around. And many of the byproducts, waste that came from these factories, they didn't know what to do with them. Many solid waste, liquid waste, etc. They actually took them to this place, this called Love Canal of the village. They put a dumping site there and dumped everything there. It went on for a number of years. But what happened was, suddenly you realize the real estate is important. It is closer to Niagara Falls. A lot of tourists will come. So you need to have housing. You need to have malls. You need to have tourist spots to be created. Therefore, the government at that time decided to build a lot of new buildings at that time, house a lot of people there, after kind of burying everything, put them under the ground and so on. But that was okay for a while. But after some time, what happened was, when it rained heavily, under the leaching from the ground, many of these chemicals that were dumped over a period of time, they were all there, and they started leaching into the groundwater. And then people who were using this water fell sick, and they had serious problems. And then the Environmental Protection Agency at that time in the United States said, this is a problem we have to address seriously. Now we have to have a mechanism for waste disposal. It cannot be, no factory can dispose of chemicals just like that. They have to be processed. They have to be somehow make sure they are not disposed of indiscriminately. Therefore, after this was brought to the notice of the government, then registrations were in place to make sure all chemical and factories of that kind would come up with mechanisms for waste disposal. And again, closer to home, this is 1984, sometime in December, in the winter time in Bhopal. There is this Union Carbide factory in Bhopal at that time. And they were making insecticides, and of course it was important, it was needed. But what is to be noted here, one, the important ingredient that they used for making this insecticide was a gas known as methyl isocyanate. It is a toxic gas. Obviously, you have to handle them with care, store them with care. Of course, they were taking precautions, all right, but nevertheless, the storage tank containing methyl isocyanate, there is a leakage in December 1984 from Union Carbide plant in Bhopal. And because of that, you remember, there was a huge tragedy in Bhopal, which killed close to about 4,000 people. Very large number of people were disabled, had lifelong afflictions with various kinds of problems. Then our government woke up at that time. They had again come up with, of course, Union Carbide plant was closed, investigations are on, but these are all after the fact. But what is important is how is it the factories and industries keep, store hazardous chemicals. And therefore, they had to come up with legislations for doing this kind of a thing. Then again, some legislations they were done after that event. Again, another thing that many of you are aware, familiar with, because all this, we all use this in the so-called air conditioning, refrigeration. At that time, what is known as the fluorocarbons or CFCs, discovered at that time in the 1980s, and they were actually being used routinely for air conditioning and refrigeration. But they didn't realize, while it is very good for refrigeration and air conditioning, but eventually they found during that time that it is also responsible for what is known as the ozone hole in the atmosphere. That means you have a serious problem there. And initially it was thought to be harmless, but it turned out it is a serious problem one. And therefore you have to now, what do? You have to obviously come up with substitutes, alternates for CFCs, which can do the same job. That means you have to come up with innovative, creative ways of solving a problem that throws up challenges there. Actually, because when it happened and people observed this ozone hole and problems arising from that, this led to a meeting in Montreal to come up with what is known as the Montreal Protocol. And that protocol decided CFCs will be completely phased out, and henceforth only certain substitute which seem to be good for doing air conditioning and refrigeration will be used. Therefore, CFCs were completely phased out, and that happened at that time. So of course, there are many instances of this kind that one can talk about. But what you have to see here is all of them have what one would call as command and control approach. What do you mean by this? Because you see a same pattern to all these disasters. You see then unforeseen chemical consequences resulted in a tragedy. The tragedy resulted in public outrage, and the public outrage resulted in controlling legislation. Therefore, only when there is a problem and you suddenly wake up and say something you have to do, and laws were enacted to make sure that kind of a thing does not happen again. But what you see is this kind of approach is what you would generally call as a bandage approach. Why? This will be similar to if you have wound somewhere, you put a bandage there. And then you have another thing coming up somewhere else, you put another bandage there. These are all temporary solutions to handle a deep-rooted problem that may be something else. And therefore, this kind of a bandage approach was a knee-jerk reaction to calamities, disasters that happen based on the chemical product that were there. And therefore, this kind of an approach obviously is not sustainable. We can't keep on doing this forever. Therefore, it is that in the 1990 to the present day, we call as the green chemistry approach. Because this is a stage you will see that people have completely woken up now. Up to the 1960 to 1990, they were slowly waking up, coming up with all the, requesting the government should take action. But the 1990 onwards, the last 30 years now, is the one which approaches this whole thing as called green chemistry approach. during the early 90s, the new approach to pollution prevention, and this is where green chemistry evolved. What is the basis of this approach? You have to obviously come up with new industrial process that do not use or produce environmentally harmful substances. Which means then, if there is methyl isocyanate or the cause in Bhopal, you will have to now see what is an equivalent of methyl isocyanate that you can use. You can still produce the insecticide. That's the way you have to think now. It obviously, you will see, it requires the application of, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be creative in your thinking. You have to be creative and you have to be innovative, because the chemistry is already known. That is why I said this is not new chemistry. It is innovative chemistry. It is a chemistry with a difference as to how you want to apply that to practical problems. Very often, chemistry alone may not be needed. Alone may not be sufficient. So it has to be interdisciplinary. You may need the help of a chemical engineer. You may need the help of somebody else, and a biologist and environmental scientist, to look at the whole problem and come up with a solution. Therefore, the chemistry it is appropriate for sustainable future is the one that needs to be read. As I mentioned earlier, the whole process of sustainable chemistry or green chemistry, while you come up with a process, a product, you have to worry about the so-called cost effectiveness of the product. And as I said, public acceptability, the so-called general acceptability of the common man. If it is not there, then of course it is no good. Therefore, it is not by regulation by the government. That is, legislation is one thing, but legislation alone cannot solve the problem. It has to have social acceptability. It is at that point in the 1990s, there are two people who are, in my opinion, mainly responsible. As you can see here, this is only what you call a common sense approach, nothing else. In this case, Paul Anastas and John Warner, two chemists from the United States, came up with a common sense approach and guidelines for practice of chemistry in the laboratory and in the industry. I'm sorry. According to them, this is the definition given by Paul Anastas and John Warner, the utilization of a set of principles that reduces or eliminates the use, generation of hazardous substances in the design, manufacture, and application of chemical products. And that's the most important part. And you can see here, they came up with this book on green chemistry, theory and practice that was published in 1998. So we've been about, already 22 years now. So it has been some progress we have made, but we are the first one to alert the people and put them all together and to illustrate how this chemistry is called as green chemistry is nothing but a common sense approach to things. You can see here, they came up with what you call as 12 principles of green chemistry. Just like you have the so-called 10 commandments in Bible, these are the so-called 12 commandments as far as application of chemistry to for industry and laboratory. And you will see here, again, nothing, as you will go along, I don't have time to go into each one of these and illustrate, because it will take a lot of time to see. You, as you will go along, you will see everything is a common sense thing, nothing else. What it says, the first one, it is better to prevent waste rather than to treat or clean up after it is formed. This is something that all of us know. Prevention is better than cure. This is basically what it's all about. This is a common sense. Therefore, that's basically the first principle of green chemistry. And when you do chemistry, and the laboratory always do synthesis to make products. According to this, the second most important principle is synthetic method should be designed in such a way that you maximize the incorporation of all atoms into the final product. All materials that you use, will they go into the final product? If all of them have not gone in, something has become a waste, something has become a byproduct, therefore that becomes a waste, and you have to worry about managing that part. Therefore, this is what you would call as atom economy, as I will come to that soon. How do you incorporate all the material A plus B plus C going to D, whether the constituents of A, B, and C have gotten incorporated into the final product D? If they are not, obviously they become a byproduct or a side product and becomes a waste. That's what you have to remember. And other third one is say synthetic methodology should be designed to use and generate substances that possess little or no toxicity. Again, a common sense. Why would you want to kind of come up with a process that actually generates substances that are toxic to human environment? That is the common sense tells you you should not be doing that part. That means you think before you design your experiment. That's basically what it is, nothing more. And if you are coming up with a product, again goes without saying, you have to make sure if it is for human consumption, it cannot be toxic. Or already a product is there with toxicity, you have to come up with a process which will actually reduce this toxicity considerably. That's what your innovation, creativity will have to be involved in. Therefore, whatever product that you make will have to make sure it has no toxicity or reduces the toxicity for human consumption. And in chemistry in general, all of us use solvents for doing chemical reaction. The use of solvent should be made unnecessary wherever possible. Why do we say that? Most of the time we use organic solvents like chloroform, dichloromethane, benzene, things of that kind, right? These are all volatile organic solvents which very often can be highly detrimental to the atmosphere, pollution, as well as highly toxic. Some of them very often can be tumor producing, cancer causing substances. And therefore, if we can actually come up with situations where no solvent is used, that will be the best option. Or can use water as a solvent, because water is kind of benign, there's no problem. Wherever possible, if you are doing a reaction that is already known in the literature, something which is done in benzene, something done in chloroform, tetrahydrofuran, can you do the same action in water and with same efficiency? Because you have to remember, we always worry about cost efficiency, economically viable. Therefore, always keep in mind what kind of a solvent do you use, whether it is necessary at all, and if you have to use them, can you use water instead, is what one asks the question. And also you have to keep, when you are talking about industry particularly, if you are looking at reactions that are done at very low temperature or at very high temperature, very low pressure or very high pressure, they all would need separate kind of machinery, equipment to control the temperature, control the pressure, and the energy requirements obviously will be very high. And therefore, whatever you do, particularly for industrial production, you have to make sure the energy requirements are not very high. And therefore, what is the message? Can you, for example, do reactions at room temperature and atmospheric pressure? Can the reaction be done? Unfortunately, not all reactions can be done. Therefore, this is where your innovation will come in. How does one save energy by doing reactions which probably under ambient conditions? That's again very important. And again, in chemistry, we obviously have to start from somewhere. And therefore, you use that and start building as to what you want to make, a new product. That raw material that you use, if it is from fossil fuels, obviously you said not renewable, and they will disappear. That means, can you come up with raw materials which are renewable? They are available from plant sources and other sources which are in principle renewable. And therefore, that becomes an important part of doing chemistry. And in chemistry, very often when you want to make a compound, you go through 10 steps, 15 steps, 20 steps that you make. Maybe a drug, for example, you want to make. What is important is, instead of doing the reaction in 10 steps, can you actually get the same compound in 2 steps, maybe 3 steps? That means, what are the steps that are unnecessary? For example, protection and deproduction is something which commonly used in chemistry and organic chemistry in particular. Therefore, can you think of avoiding unnecessary steps and therefore minimize the number of steps involved in making compound? That is, again, all these are common sense things. Another important thing, most of us in the early days, the stoichiometric reagents are really used. For example, you are doing an oxidation with potassium permanganate, chromic acid, all right? And these are things that you know very often produce a large amount of byproduct when you do stoichiometric amount, because end up with a lot of chromium waste, manganese waste to be disposed of. Therefore, can one do reaction instead of stoichiometric reagent? Can you do reaction with catalytic reagent? Obviously, you will see the amount of product or byproduct that you will come up with will be very minimal or practically nil. Therefore, wherever possible, can one use catalysis to come up with a product that you want to make? Again, this common sense tells you this is what you should be doing. And again, when you are looking at chemical reaction, you have to make sure that the byproduct that you get is not kind of bad for the environment. If you are going to be doing a reaction that produces carbon monoxide, produces NO, produces sulfur dioxide as a byproduct, and goes into the environment, and obviously they are very bad. That means you have to make sure that these are the kind of things should not be formed if possible, or if it is formed, can you come up with a mechanism by which they do not persist in the environment? That means your design elements in your experiment for production will have to take care of this part when you do chemistry. And again, you should always have method, particularly is important for industry. When you are talking about, you should have a way of analyzing real-time analysis of your reaction to make sure if there is going to be formation of an hazardous substance, you should be able to detect it and therefore prevent it from getting out of control. And that's again important. And just like what you said earlier, substances should be chosen as to minimize chemical accidents, including release, explosion, and fire, like the Bhopal tragedy, because we are using methyl isocyanate there. Therefore, we had that leakage, and of course, the problem associated with that. That's why I said you have to come up with substitutes for the so-called substances which are toxic and have an equivalent which is innocuous. And can that be done? And these are all you have to remember. Easy to say, but difficult to put into practice. This is where you need a lot of creative, innovative thinking. So what is therefore being chemistry? In the early days, when people, if at all, even in the 60s and 70s, people were only worried about if there is a product waste is formed, how do you treat it as a waste? Or benign disposal was considered as an important solution, but not anymore. Then came, can you come up with ways of recycling and reuse of these wastes? That is okay, it's better than this, but still not the best solution. And the other part that is more important is reduce chemical usage, energy usage. Can that be done in your process? Therefore, reduce chemical usage as much as possible. I think that's where your catalytic process will come into picture. Ultimately then, what is very important, the base of the pyramid that you see, replace all, when you have a chemical reaction, study them carefully and see what are the substances that appear to be hazardous material. What are the processes that appear to be hazardous? What are the processes that appear to be inefficient? What are the things, in your opinion, are not sustainable components? And that means you have to replace one by one and see whether you have an alternate substitute that will actually be benign, that will be useful, that will be good. This is what we mean. You have a starting material, you have reagent you use solvent, and you get product and you have byproduct. As I said, always when you have written down something on piece of paper, before you actually perform the experiment, you have to make sure these are the 4 things that you have to do. And that is very critical. First of all, assess the reaction condition. Focus on solvent and focus on reagent. These are the 2 things that are there. And what are they using them? Are they good ones or the bad one? Can you do something there? Identify the hazardous materials or inefficient procedures. And when you identify them, now you have to be creative. Modify the process, and you have to, modification alone is not enough. If it has to be efficient, therefore the efficacy of the new procedure that you have to be tested out. If it is not efficient, there's no point. It doesn't help. And also you have to evaluate overall process from starting material, reagent, solvent, everything will have to be done in total. And therefore this the process that you keep doing over and over again. And therefore, finally, you may come up with something which is may not be perfect, but as good as possible to the perfection. That is basically what we have to do. When you are looking at what is green chemistry, then you will also ask, when do you know it is green, when it is not green? Because you have to see green is a color. And it's nothing like there are different shades of green. It's a continuum. It's a light shade of green, dark shade of green. And something which is not green can be brown, dark, whatever. All right. So you have to see there is a continuum. It is not an absolute scale in that sense. You have to see how best you can come up with something which is as green as possible. So this is where you see how do you measure what is green chemistry, what the process that you have is green or not. And this is something way back in 1891, Thomson and Lord Kelvin, they came up with this, I quote that thing. And he says here, this is very relevant. When you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, then you know something about it. That means if you have some number put on something, then you know you have some feeling for what it is. Whereas if you cannot measure it, you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge on that particular thing is very unsatisfactory. That means you are only trying to beginning of knowledge. You have not fully understood. You have in your thought not advanced to the stage of science yet. That means you should be able to express it in some quantify, in some numbers. Then only you know whether you want to, how do you reduce that number, all right? Then only you can measure something which is green or not. That means again, is a quote, if you don't keep score, then you are only practicing. It doesn't help. If you can measure it, then you can manage. Because unless you know what is the number put on something which is good or bad, then only you can see whether you can improve that to a better number. That is basically what it is. So what is the kind of metrics in green chemistry? This is again something which has been known and is propagated by Sheldon in the United Kingdom many years ago. So how do we know a process that we are making is green? And he came up with the so-called E factor or the efficiency factor. And according to him, you have to see how much amount of waste that is produced per kilogram of product. This is all that is simple. You have 1 kilogram of product that you have produced, and in the process of getting that 1 kilogram, how much kilogram of waste that you have produced. And he has made some kind of an analysis of bulk chemical industry, which is very often is a very large, 10 to the power 4, 10 to the power 5 tons is the annual thing, or maybe even more. There, the efficiency factor is very small, between 1 to 5. That means, even though there is a large volume industry, the E factor is seem to be better, very good. Whereas fine chemical industry, which deals with about 10 to the power 2, 10 to the power 4 tons, the E factor now is gone up, means 5 to 50, which means it produces more waste than per kilogram of product. And when you come to pharmaceutical industry, which is a smaller volume compared to the other two, which is very often of the tune of about 10 to 10 to the power 3 tons. Now you find the E factor for pharma industry is 25 or sometimes even close to 100. It means pharmaceutical industry, for example, produces more waste per kilogram of product. That's basically what you have to remember then. And to give you an example of what we are talking about, a very simple reaction that you do in a textbook chemistry in a way. You can see here. So what is it you're trying to do? This is what you see is glycerol here, all right? And you want to convert glycerol as an important product, and you want to make what is known as 2-methoxypropane 1,3-diol, which is this product here, all right? This one. So this is a compound which is needed in the industry in a large scale. So starting from glycerol, how do you make that compound? And you can see here, glycerol has 2 primary hydroxyl groups and 1 secondary hydroxyl group. What you want to achieve is convert the secondary hydroxyl group to a methoxyl group here. But it cannot be done just like that, because if you do that, everything gets, reacting, and therefore you get a mixture of products with that. Therefore, the chemical industry had used this procedure. First, protect these 2 primary hydroxyl group with what is known, don't worry about this compound known as treatyl chloride, okay? Triphenyl methyl chloride here. And you can see here, this is treated with treatyl chloride and triethylamine, and this first reacts with the primary hydroxyl groups to produce what is known as the treatyl ether here. That is the first step. And that step, you have produced this byproduct with this triethylamine hydrochloride. Now, you take this compound and react this with methyl iodide and triethylamine. What you are trying to do is methylate this secondary hydroxyl group because these two are protected as the treatyl groups. And at that stage, there is no problem. It produces the 2-methoxy compound there, all right? Except, again, you have produced a byproduct here. This is what it is. Now you have got the methoxyl group where you want it, no problem. But the 2 treatyl group that you introduce now, they are a waste. You have to remove them now because they don't need them. You don't need them anymore. And then you treat that in the third step with acetic acid, and that removes the treatyl ether, hydrolyzes that. You get back your 2 primary hydroxyl groups, and the methoxyl group is there at 2 position. And what has happened in the process is you produce a large amount of these wastes here. That means going from glycerol to this, you have 3 steps are involved, and you have produced these 3 byproducts there. So basically what it says, assume that each step that you have 100% yield, assume. It may not be true. Even assuming there are 100%, the reaction, 1 kilogram of glycerol gives you 1.15 kilogram of the 2-methyl ether, that is this compound. And what is important is it produces 12 kilograms of these 3 compounds that is there on the right hand extreme. And these are the 3 wastes there. And 1.15 kilogram of this compound, while making that, you have produced 12 kilograms of this waste, which has to be separated and thrown out and do something with that part. Therefore, that is a very inefficient process. Therefore, this way, that is not a good thing at all, because then you have to worry about managing a lot of things. So therefore, what you have to see, the measures of synthetic efficiency, there are 3 things that are involved when you have to keep in mind. One is known as the reaction, chemical yield of a reaction. This is something that most of you know. If you start with some X, go to your product Y, and how much did you get, or the percentage yield? The percentage yield is actual quantity of products that you form and actual theoretical quantity of product we should have actually got. If you are supposed to get 100 grams, you got only 90 grams, and assuming everything else remain the same, you would say you got only 90%. And therefore, that we call as the chemical yield or percentage yield. That is something routinely used in chemical reaction. The other thing that comes into the picture is what is known as reaction selectivity, which is, again, I will not go into the details. How much of the percentage of desired product you get by amount of substrate converted to the product. That into 100, that gives you the percentage of reaction selectivity for a process. The third one, which is the more important one, is molecular weight of the desired product that you form by molecular weight of all products that are formed. That means the product that you want, your side product, byproduct, everything together. And so that into 100 becomes atom economy. So that's something which was defined by Barry Trost in the US. This became a very, very important factor. And he called it as atom economy. Maybe I will go back to that part. Synthetic methods should be designed to maximize the incorporation of all materials used in the process into the final product. That basically was the atom economy. That means whatever you started with, whether all the atoms that you started with, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, everything has been incorporated into the final product. If it is not, that product becomes a waste. That is the problem. Now, how many atoms in the reactant are incorporated in the final product and how many are wasted? That's the one which defines green chemistry in a way. Again, illustrate with a simple example here. This is a textbook chemistry that you all read. For example, you start with N-butanol here, okay? And N-butanol, you want to treat that, you want to convert that to N-butyl bromide. The textbook organic chemistry in high school, right? You take N-butanol and react that with sodium bromide and sulfuric acid. These are the reagents used traditionally, and produces N-bromobutane, and you produce sodium hydrogen sulfate as a byproduct of the reaction. Whatever you like, this is what happens. Now you ask, what is the atom economy for this process? And I will not go into details of calculation, but it turns out percentage atom economy for this reaction of N-butanol with sodium bromide, sulfuric acid giving N-butane bromide, and sodium hydrogen sulfate, the atom economy for this after calculation, you may do it yourself, and you find it is only 50%. I mean, only 50% of the atoms have been incorporated and 50% is wasted material and which is bad. Therefore, you have to come up with something which is different. Again, another important industrial process you have to look at. This is a compound known as aniline that you all study. And this is a conversion of aniline to hydroquinone. This is hydroquinone here in the bottom. This is a very important industrial process. And the classical route for many, many years was to involve a two-stage process of aniline oxidation first with manganese dioxide, sulfuric acid to form what is known as benzoquinone here. And in the process of the first step, ammonium sulfate is a byproduct, manganese sulfate is a byproduct. So, and they have to separate, purify, get benzoquinone. Having obtained benzoquinone and take it in the second stage, you now reduce that with iron metal in water. And this now reduces benzoquinone to hydroquinone. And in the process, you produce iron oxide as a byproduct of the reaction. That means for oxidation of aniline to hydroquinone, you have produced these three byproducts: iron oxide, manganese sulfate, and ammonium sulfate. And now if you look at what is the so-called hydroquinone atom economy calculation, again, you can do it yourself as an exercise and try it out, although I have indicated that here. But what happens is, when you do this calculation, the atom economy for this process is 18.8%. What it means is more than 80% of the material has become a waste in the form of manganese sulfate, ammonium sulfate, iron oxide. They have to be thrown out, something else. They are not part of your product that you want. That means even assuming this reaction gives you 100% yield for these two processes, you get less than 20% of useful product, which means there's no good, because this process per se is totally atom economy inefficient. Therefore, it cannot be done. Although this is the way industry was producing that. But in subsequent years, after the green chemistry became important and people started doing differently. I give you another process where the Upjohn Chemical Company in the United States decided to modify this process and say it is much better, far superior to the classical aniline oxidation. And you see this process. This is a compound known as bisphenol here, which is cheap, available in large quantity. And what they did in Upjohn Company was simply take this bisphenol, the compound here, and do what is known as alkaline cracking. When you do the reaction with alkali and do the cracking, it now gives you isopropenyl phenol here and a byproduct of the reaction. You keep that aside. Now you take this isopropenyl phenol and treat with hydrogen peroxide now. This then oxidizes isopropenyl phenol to hydroquinone. This is the one that you want. And the byproduct is acetone here. And you will ask me the question, why do you think this process is efficient? Because although in both the cases you have a byproduct. In the first stage, phenol is a byproduct and acetone is a byproduct. Now, what is interesting is the way bisphenol is formed is by treating phenol and acetone. If you treat that, you get bisphenol. That means whatever was considered as a waste, as a byproduct of the reaction with the phenol and acetone, you can put them together to make your starting material, namely bisphenol. And therefore, this is an innovative way of thinking so that this process, this is an efficient process. The atom economy now is almost 100% because you have recycled within this thing to make the starting material. You don't have to do it again. Therefore, this is the way that you have to keep in mind in doing green chemistry. So therefore, one can look at, there are a lot of reactions that are inherent atom economy. There are reactions known as rearrangement, addition reaction, cycloaddition reactions of different kind. There's nothing changes. Whatever number of atoms you started with, they remain the same. Therefore, these reactions by definition are atom economical reaction. Whereas if you're doing a substitution reaction, if you're doing an elimination reaction, you do a Grignard reaction that you all know, it produces a lot of byproduct. And therefore, their atom economy is bad there. I will probably skip that. And again, another question that people ask is, I always like to have a large percentage yield. And also I would like to have atom economy is good. Therefore, you may ask the question, I have a reaction which gives 100% yield, but it gives only 35% atom economy. Is it good compared to another reaction which I have, where it gives me only 90% yield compared to 100, but my atom economy is 85. Which one is better? And it obviously turns out this is much better. 90 into 85 is much better, superior to a reaction, even though it gives 100% yield. That's not something which you have to look at. I'll probably skip some of these. I think I probably don't have too much time. And there is also very often the question that is asked is difference between environmental chemistry and green chemistry. Are they same? Are they different? What you see there, both areas of study seek to make the world a better place. These two are complementary to each other. Environmental science identifies sources, elucidates the mechanisms, and quantifies problems in the Earth environment. That is the general idea in environmental engineering or science. Whereas green chemistry seeks to solve these problems by creating alternative safe technologies. So green chemistry, in my opinion, is not environmental chemistry. They are different. Green chemistry targets pollution, prevents it at the source during design, and therefore your innovative thinking becomes an important process. Therefore, all the time you will see in the early days, you will always worried about the yield and what are the kind of materials that goes in terms of feedstock. If they balance together, we are happy and everything was fine. That is not obviously on. Now what you see here is yield alone is to be balanced with not only feedstock. You have to look at regulatory compliance, disposal, liability, treatment. So all these factors will have to be taken into account. And then only, this is the present day. And that is what our green chemistry is all about. And you see, it is now not only economical, but you also look at environmental part. All this to be balanced somehow. That is an important part of that. I think I'm coming to the end of that talk. What is important is the world will not evolve past the current state of crisis by using the same thinking that created the situation. This is by Albert Einstein many years ago. It is very apt because if you keep thinking the same old way, you will not find a solution to this. You have to come up with an out-of-the-box thinking. Then and only then you will have a solution to the problem. And there are two important books that some of you will have to probably read. One is known as Biomimicry. Another one is called the Cradle to Cradle. And both of them talk about how you learn from nature and try to formulate your ideas based on nature. And that will make a lot of difference. Because the cradle to cradle is essentially like a cyclic process. See? Because this is a phrase is kind of invented by Stahel many years ago. And actually a book came out, I told you that. Because here, this cradle to cradle process is one where you start with something and you come back to the same thing in a cyclic thing. During the course of the cycle, whatever is from, they're all taken care of. They are being used and reused and put to complete. Therefore, nothing is wasted in the cyclic process. On the other hand, if you're talking about the cradle to grave, it's like a one-way process. You start with A, go to B, and on the way, then you do not come back. And it is in the cradle to grave process, you don't take responsibility for the disposal of the goods that you have produced, what are the kind of things that you put in there, all that become. Therefore, our mindset, thinking will have to change of a cyclic process have to be done rather than a lateral cradle to grave kind of process will be avoided. That's what the whole thing is all about. And finally, I would say, you ask again the question before I leave, when should chemists stop thinking about green chemistry? The way one would look at it is when pigs fly, because that's not going to happen. Therefore, you have to keep thinking about green chemistry all the time and innovatively, creatively come up with solutions to problems that we face today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah,
Very nice talk on the
stop sharing now.
chemistry for
I'm
sustainable
sorry, I
development.
probably take a little bit more time.
No problem, sir. No problem. No issues.
Yeah.
Sir has given very nice talk on the chemistry for sustainable development. We talk about the need of economic growth, environmental, economic, and social sustainability, commands and controls approach, concept of green chemistry. He has explained 12 principles of green chemistry, including the prevention is better than cure, and unnecessary derivatization, use and recyclability of the product, like the autonomous economy and E factors. Sir, there are two questions.
Yeah, please. Yeah, sure. Yeah, tell me. Yeah.
One of the attendees is asking that refrigerator contains chemicals that called fluorinated hydrocarbons.
Yes.
That is called as freon. It is used as a coolant in air conditioner as well as refrigerators.
Correct. Yes, yeah.
So his question is that whether any alternative for this freon gas and how it
There-
can be reduced to deflect the ozone layer, reduced to deflect the ozone layer.
Yes, well, there are a number of things are being developed, but every time you always see nothing like a perfect solution. You still need to have these kind of fluorinated compound. Maybe there are good fluorinated compound, but the so-called CFCs, that particular compound was a bad one. But you might want to look at other fluorinated compound. That thing is going on. There are a lot of things which are similar have been developed. We are better. That doesn't mean that a perfect solution to a compound. Nothing like this will not have a problem, because most of the time what we use today, the effect of that will become apparent only after X number of years. That is the difficulty. Therefore, today what you produce, we may actually find out only after some time that in fact is not as good as we thought originally. Therefore, there are attempts being made of different kind of fluorinated compound, which can still be useful refrigerant, but maybe much better than CFC itself. There are attempts being made at the present time.
Okay, and next question from one of the attendees. In green synthesis, why plants or microbes reagents are used?
Because the plants are the one which are renewable. Microbes are something which are plenty. There are millions of microbes available to you. Therefore, enzymatic processes, microbial processes are something which you are not destroying anything. They are already available to you. You can have a bacteria from soil, bacteria from somewhere else. And if you can get them to use for your chemical reactions, then that will be the best, because they would come under what you call as generally renewable kind of resources. That is the reason. Plants again grow again. Therefore, the use of plant derived material will be called as renewable resources. That is why. Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Very nice talk. Now I would like to invite Dr. P. Sir to introduce Professor Suvan Sir Kulkarni. Sir, unmute yourself.
Good morning again. I have great pleasure in introducing Professor Suvan Kulkarni, the man behind materializing this program. Professor Suvan Kulkarni, he received his PhD in organic chemistry from University of Pune in 2001. And after his PhD, he pursued his postdoctoral research in the laboratory of Professor Shang Cheng Hung at Academia Sinica, Taipei, and then moved to University of California, Davis to work with Professor Jacqueline Gervais Haig in 2005. And after returning, he joined Indian Association for Cultivation of Science at Kolkata in 2008. And later he joined in Bombay IIT in 2009. And he subsequently rose to the rank of full professor in 2006. And his current research interests include devising newer ways for efficient chemical synthesis of complex glycoconjugates implicated in various infectious diseases. And I am glad that he is the best teacher awardee in IIT Bombay for 2017. And he is a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and is recipient of the CRSI Bronze Medal for the year 2017. And Dr. H.C. Srivastava Young Scientist Award 2016. And he is member of the editorial board of Carbohydrate Research. And with so many distinctions, and we are lucky to have him. And I have seen him because he keeps visiting Nagpur for various Royal Society activities. And I feel very happy that he is very student friendly, and he mixes up with the students and guides them. And I am very happy to invite Professor Suvan Kulkarni for his presentation on green chemistry in carbohydrate synthesis. Thank you. Welcome, Professor Kulkarni.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shivaswarup. Can you see my slides?
They
Yes,
are
sir.
visible.
Okay. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. I would like to thank Professor Shivaswarup for a very kind introduction. And also I would like to thank the college for inviting me, the organizing committee for inviting me in this important event. So today, I'm going to talk about, after Professor Chandrasekharan's talk, he gave a very nice introduction to the green chemistry. I'm going to talk about how we try and aspire to use the green chemistry principles in our carbohydrate synthesis. Now, let me be very honest with you that when you are doing synthetic chemistry, there is really no green synthesis as such, because no matter what, you will be reacting chemicals which are inherently have different grades of toxicity, and you aspire to work with the chemicals which are less toxic though. And but you will be creating some kind of waste. How do you minimize that, and how do you go to a sustainable process? And as very nicely said by Professor Chandrasekharan sir, that when do we stop thinking about it? Basically, when pigs start flying. So I pick up from that point and begin my talk. These are the principles of green chemistry that he already discussed. And very quickly, as you can see, we aspire to prevent the formation of waste. It should be atomic economic, it should be less hazardous, it should be safer, and most importantly, it should be we should have safer solvent and auxiliaries designed for energy efficiency, and we should use renewable feedstock, reduce derivatives, go for a catalysis, and our design should have degradation in it, and we should be able to analyze the pollution prevention in a real time, and basically we aspire overall to do safer chemistry. So as far as carbohydrate chemistry is concerned, we are blessed because we work with renewable feedstock, and our starting materials like glucose, mannose, and so on, they are non-toxic. But we have multiple hydroxyl groups, and as sir told that you cannot have multiple protecting groups, because then each time you have a protecting group, you are increasing 2 steps of protection and deprotection. So what we do then is we try to minimize the number of protecting groups and do reactions in a regioselective and stereoselective manner. So here how we do what we do. As I mentioned, that our advantage is that we are working with a natural and abundant feedstock, which are the sugars like D-glucose and L-rhamnose. They're cheaply available, they are non-toxic, and they are rich source of chiral synthons. And when we do our reactions in lab, we keep these things in mind. We try to design as mild as conditions are possible. We try to do catalytic transformation and do regioselective reactions on multiple hydroxyl groups, and stereoselective and one-part processes we try to design. Then always I tell my students, and we all follow, that whenever we try new reaction, we do it on an extremely small scale, like 10 milligram, 20 milligram, up to 100 milligram scale reactions for optimization, so that inherently we generate very little waste. And we always do recovery and recycling of solvents. So as Professor Chandrasekharan mentioned, that solvents is the main culprit. So, but we can't avoid solvents because we have to do chromatographic purification. So we reduce the number of chromatographic purification, and we recycle the solvent again for the next purification. So then we try to reach a sustainable solution by minimizing waste, by using less hazardous chemicals, by reducing silica gel columns and recycling solvents, and thereby leading to less pollution. So with this introduction on green chemistry, now let me go to our work and let me introduce you to the world of carbohydrates. First question is, why carbohydrates? Why do we need to synthesize these carbohydrates? So carbohydrates, as you know, they are ubiquitously distributed on the cell surface, where they participate in a variety of vital life processes, such as viral and bacterial infection, cell-cell interaction, and immune response, to name a few. Structurally, they are very diverse and complex, and they are formed in microheterogeneous nature in nature. And that's where synthetic chemists like us come into picture, because if you want to develop a drug or a vaccine out of carbohydrates, you cannot rely on natural sources because you get a minuscule amount of a compound, which is a microheterogeneous mixture. So you don't know in the end whether you are dealing with a minor component or major component that is giving the biological activity. And therefore, we need access to pure compound. Well, this is another cartoon picture showing you the position of carbohydrates on the cell surface. As you can appreciate, carbohydrates are perfectly positioned. For example, glycoproteins, which are attached to proteins, or glycolipids, which are where sugar are attached to lipids, they're perfectly positioned to do anything that has to be done at the cell-cell interface. So they are key players in cell-cell communication and signaling processes. And for many years, it was believed that carbohydrates are only present in us, in eukaryotes, and they are virtually absent in bacteria. But this notion has been refuted over the last 20 years, and now it is well accepted that carbohydrates are also present on the surface of bacteria. You can see this beautiful TEM image taken from Weizmann Institute at Israel, showing you a single cell organism, Bacillus subtilis, a bacteria. And all these small hair-like structures on the cell surface, they are nothing but carbohydrates. We call them glycocalyx. So when you can imagine now, when a bacteria enters our system, enters inside our body, our immune system recognizes this cell surface, which is nothing but the carbohydrate. So there's a great interest in synthesizing these carbohydrates and use it for a variety of processes. Now, I will first tell you some of our work on the bacterial glycan, and then I will specifically tell you the second story on Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And those are two short stories. So as I mentioned, that bacterial glycans are there, but there's a difference that while our glycome has N-acetyl galactosamine, this blue colored sugar on our surface as a starting sugar, bacteria often have these deoxyamino sugars like DATDH here, diacetoamidotrideoxyhexose, or bacillosamine or fucosamine, which are shown in these various bacterial glycans. What is important is that the presence or absence of these sugars have been shown to be linked to pathogenesis, meaning that they're important for infection processes. And recently, there is also great interest in synthesis of zypterionic polysaccharides, as they have both charges and they can directly bind to T cells to invoke specific immune response, which is required for vaccine development. So to cut the long story short, what we require is we need access to these blue colored, the galactosamine building blocks, and the red color or pink colored ones, rare sugars, for making all these compounds, which will be useful for vaccine development and also for selective detection and targeting of bacteria. So that's where we were when we started our work in 2011, and this was our strategy. So we thought that we can start with a natural and abundant feedstock, D-mannose, which is also non-toxic, shown here. And we can do, taking help of the primary, higher reactivity of the primary hydroxyl group, we can do deoxygenation here. Then we can do, taking help of the syn disposition of this hydroxyl group, we can do acylation here. And then we'll be left with a diol, which we can then convert it into good living group. And if we can get selectivity in displacement of these two good living groups, then we can do double inversion, leading to all the rare sugars by merely changing the nucleophile that we use. So this was what we had in our mind in 2011 when we started the project. So I'll take you through the sequence, initial sequence. So as I mentioned, the primary hydroxyl has a higher reactivity, so you don't need to protect all these hydroxyl groups. You can directly do tosylation. The reaction works well. So you do a regioselective reaction. So you are minimizing waste by not using protecting groups and deprotection steps. And then this tosylate can be reduced by LH. So this hydride, you can displace the tosylate to convert this into deoxy sugar. That's a methyl group here. And now taking help of the syn disposition of the diol, you can use a variety of reagents. And at that point of time, use a catalytic amount of dimethyltin dichloride. And some of you might immediately say that, yeah, tin, although you are using very small amount, tin is still toxic. So later on, we found out that we can also use boronate esters, or we can use a copper triplet to do the same transformation. But this was the original reaction. And how the reaction proceeds. So in this reaction, we created the acylated products selectively at disposition without protection, deprotection. and the reaction takes place because of the selective team coordination to the cis diol, which enhances the nucleophilicity of the C3 hydroxyl, the equatorial hydroxyl group. So this reaction works well on a gram scale. From here to here, you can get a 0.8 gram of diol. And so in this, we are using two green chemistry principles. We are using regioselective reactions, and we are doing catalytic reactions. And the reaction, as I mentioned, also works well with a catalytic amount of environmentally benign copper triplet, also works well. Then the stage was set for nucleophilic displacement of these two triplets. So for diol was converted to bis triplet, and we thought that this triplet is easier to get displaced. Why we thought so? Because if you consider the two SN2 transition states, this one, SN2 attack, is facile, is not facile, is disfavored because of the presence of this axial, the presence of the axial triplet group here at 2 position. But if you consider the bottom phase attack, there is no electronic repulsion or steric repulsion for this attack. So as soon as this triplet undergoes displacement, now the window is open for the top phase attack because this triplet is gone. So now you can add another nucleophile and do SN2 attack to get to your product. So this was our idea. And when we started doing the reaction, indeed, what we observed is that when we use sodium azide, we started getting a bis product. And so we added 2 equivalent of sodium azide to get the diazodo compound. The breakthrough came though when Madhu Emmadi, my first student, he used tetrabutyl ammonium azide, 1 equivalent exactly in acetonitrile at -30 degrees. He could displace only 1 triplet, and then he could add the second nucleophile in the same pot, giving him this compound. And you just have to do 1 column chromatographic purification at the end of the sequence. So, well, you can change this nucleophile to tetrabutyl ammonium nitrite and get a hydroxyl here instead of phthalimide, and you can do an iteration of triflation inversion to get the diazodo group. And sometimes when you want to do have the protecting group here, we just added water and reflux the reaction. So this reaction proceeded by orthoester migration process, giving us this product. So this work was published in Nature Protocol, and the protocol was very well accepted by international community as many people are using this protocol now. How well this reaction works, to give you an idea, from this diol to all these rare sugar building blocks, we go on a gram scale in just 1 to 2 days time, and very good overall yield. And most importantly, for green chemistry principle, we just have to do a single group chromatographic purification. That saves a lot of solvent and waste. And so what do we do with these building blocks? So these building blocks we then used for total synthesis experiment, and due to the paucity of time, I will just show you all the structures. I will not give you the details of the total synthesis. If you're interested, please have a look at our published papers. So this is like, for example, you can see this trisaccharide from Neisseria meningitidis, or this deuterionic tetrasaccharide from B fragilis. And one more complex molecule we synthesized is this polysaccharide repeating unit of Bacillus cereus. And very recently, we have also accomplished the synthesis of this phosphoroglyceramide containing trisaccharide from P. alkali fascians. So here I must tell you that each synthesis takes a student about 3 to 4 years. It's quite tough because each time we have to do a stereoselective glycosylation, and getting this 1,2 cis glycosides is extremely tough. So the students, they have to screen a number of conditions to get to the product. And a bigger Madhu, just before going for his postdoc, Madhu Emmadi, he created this bigger oligosaccharides, which was also a very challenging compound. And very recently, other people from the lab, Antara, Kavita, and Bala Saheb Gotekar and Baswati Ghosh, they have made some of these compounds from a variety of important pathogens. And this one was made by Kavita, and this one is from Sukhraj and Baswati. And then we ask, are there L-form sugars? L-form sugars are just a mirror. For example, D-mannose, you also have a L-mannose where all the stereosynthets are inverted. And we saw that natural glycans have variety of L sugars. And so we just started there are only 2 sugars, L-rhamnose and L-fucose, which are commercially available. They are abundant. and we use the same technology of selective protection and nucleophilic, the triflation and nucleophilic inversion at 2 and 4 position to get access to all these L sugars, and we could then extend them to get this fantastic oligosaccharides. If you're interested, you can look up the paper for more details. Last but not least, very recently, Diksha Rai and Archana Behra from my lab, they were able to show that D-mannose and L-rhamnose can be converted to fucosamine and L-fucosamine via SN2 transformations that I just talked about. Now they could activate this and couple with this hydroxyl group. So this iodonium activates the sulfur, you generate a carbocation here, which is then trapped by this nucleophile. And they could do it in stereoselective manner by taking help of the long range assistance of this benzoyl group to get this disaccharide in a stereoselective manner, which then they could elaborate, we could elaborate into these two important vaccine candidates from Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Staphylococcus aureus. Recently, Shayantan and Balasaheb from my lab, they have also constructed a more complicated glycan. So this is about, and what we do with all these glycans is we take it further for vaccine development. Now that takes me to my second short story, the trehalose containing glycans, and how do we use green chemistry principle of regioselective protection in this. If you see, this is very, very complicated compound, and you have various variety of lipid chain attached to different positions on this blue colored sugar called as trehalose, which is a natural sugar and abundant sugar and commercial one. But you are up with the task of discriminating the 8-hydroxyl group of the trehalose. You also have to put on a sulfur group in certain instances. So these two compounds we thought were very interesting for us when we started our work in 2011. And as you can see, this is called a sulfolipid 1, and this is diacyl sulfologlycolipid. They are both from Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and they are putative virulence factors. They're important for vaccine development. And there is a hypothesis that they're involved in immunomodulation of host, or they stabilize the cell wall. But there was no access to these compounds when we started, and some other groups have also started around the same time. So these are the three syntheses just published before us. So this was published by Bortozzi. It took 26 steps for them, and this was by Bo and Frandy. And we thought that just to begin, we can start with a simpler structure such as this tetrapalmitoyl tetraacyl sulfolipid. Okay, so this was the first breakthrough that we had, that of the 8 hydroxyl groups, we could mask 6 of them in just one step by using dimethoxycyclohexane. And we had to optimize this reaction. Finally, we found that if you do the reaction right on the rotary evaporator at controlled pressure of 140 millibar, at 60 degrees Celsius water bath temperature, we were able to get this diol directly. And this is a beautiful reaction that helped us to get access to all these beautiful compounds. So then quickly we could do acylation at these two free hydroxyl. So this regioselective reaction helped us to get this diol. And after this diol, the diacylation, we could remove all these 3 cyclohexyridine by merely treating with a mild reagent, trifluoroacetic acid, aqueous trifluoroacetic acid, or one can also do aqueous acetic acid to get rid of this protection, to get this hexaol. Now we wanted to do further reaction on the unprotected form, but due to solubility issues, we were not able to introduce the acyl groups at this position. So then we resorted to another regioselective protection method. So as you can see, we treated this with TMACL-pyridine, very mild reagent. We could protect all the 6 hydroxyl groups, and then we treat this with ammonium acetate, and it knocked off only the primary TMS groups to give us this diol. So again, there's a regioselective reaction in place, and then we mask these 2 hydroxyl groups with palmitic acid by using DCC as a coupling agent, and then you just add ion exchange reagent Dovex acid form, and then these TMS groups, they just pop off to give you tetraol. Now the task was to just selectively do sulfation on one of the hydroxyl groups which are of almost equal reactivity. But we thought that this is close to this anomeric hydroxyl oxygen, and so it is hydrogen bonded, so it will be more reactive. Fair enough. We tried standard sulfation conditions, we did not get any product. When we tried using tin catalysis we got 45% of product mixed with other regioisomer. But when we use this very unique reagent, trifluoroethoxy sulfuryl methylimidazole triplet, which you can make it in the lab, starting from methylimidazole and trifluoroethanol and sulfuryl chloride. That white solid, when we used with variety of bases, I'll quickly tell you that when we use triethylamine, with SIS reagent, the reaction was fast. In 20 minutes, we could get exclusively 77% of the product and only sulfate group at this position. So we saved a lot of steps because then we don't have to do a regioselective protection, deprotection for all these hydroxyl groups. And then we moved on to a slightly more complicated compound because we wanted to try this branched lipid chains which are there in the target molecule. And for that, started with this tricyclohexyridine. Here we could do one more regioselective reaction. So this hydroxyl group is more reactive than this because of the proximity to the anomeric acetal. And so we could selectively acylate here, and then the remaining hydroxyl group was acylated here at the 3 position. And then you remove the protecting groups as mentioned before and do the TMS trick. You protect all of them with TMS and remove only the primary using ammonium acetate to get this compound. And then you use the SIS reagent to get sulfate in place. So this was a very short and efficient synthesis with minimal protecting groups, mild conditions, less steps, and less waste in high yield. Then we moved on to the last synthesis, that is diacyl, this is Ac2HGl. So the first step was same, so I won't repeat that. So once you get this dialipid, we can selectively now do one more selective reaction. We can remove this violet color acetal because this is 5-membered and these two are 6-membered. So this is more strained, and we can remove it by PPTS methanol, but the yield was less. So what we did is we just removed it by aqueous acetic acid and protected it again by cyclohexyridine to give us this diol. And on this diol, when we tried SIS reagent, we only got 52% yield, but the conventional method with sulfur trioxide trimethylamine, thin chloride catalysis gave us better yield of 66%. And then you can remove this protecting group by mild condition TFA water to get access to this. So in this way, we were able to get access to these compounds. And as you can see, just 10 steps, 9 steps, and excellent high 24% overall yield, 13% overall yield, 18% overall yield. So which is a very, very desirable methodology if you want to make analogs and study. And later on, we made lots of analogs and studied the role of SL1 and Ac2HGl, and indeed we found that they modify the surface of our macrophage, and they also modify our immune response to the tuberculosis, and that's why tuberculosis can go and reside in our macrophage for a long time. So another examples include marodolipid, then sulfolipid I mentioned, and then a variety of succinyltrihalosis haloses from other species of mycobacteria, and then some biosurfactants. You can see very complex structures, and this is natural antibiotic. So we could make, and there's oligosaccharides, a bunch of compounds starting from trihalose, which are all potential vaccine candidates for tuberculosis. And all this we could do by using very simple chemistry, by using TMS groups, which are non-toxic, and cyclohexyridine acetal, only 2 protective groups, and only few steps, high yielding, so they are very suitable for making analogs. Later on, Shantanu from my lab, we also synthesized immugoyacin, which are very complex, and he recently is very close to synthesis of this fusarocyte, and Sudhakar is working on this glycolipid from Mycobacterium linda. So all this work was started by Vikram Sarpe in my lab, and as I mentioned that we did some studies, and if you're interested in those studies, you can see a collaborative paper by our lab and Shobna Kapoor lab in this ACS Chem Biology. We could also synthesize a much longer oligosaccharide by using alternate methods. So one of the ways of making this dissymmetrically substituted trihalose derivative is you can do 1,1 glycosylation here, in which you have to make 2 stereo centers at a time. It's a very challenging reaction, and due to the time limitation, I don't want to describe the entire chemistry, but suffice to say that you can also construct the glycosidic bond between two glucose units to make such longer oligosaccharides. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I hope I convinced you that you can start with some non-toxic, readily available feedstock material such as D-mannose and L-rhamnose, and you can transform them into a variety of orthogonally protected bacterial rare sugars by using combination of tin or copper or boron catalyzed regioselective reaction. You can do one part double parallel and double serial nucleophilic displacement of these triplets, and you can do stereoselective glycosylations to get access to a variety of bacterial glycans, which you can use it for immunological studies. And you can also use green chemistry principles in case of trehalose by doing the regioselective functionalization of trehalose to get access to trehalose glycoconjugates. Now, what remains for me now is to show you the people who actually did this work. I am just a spokesperson talking on behalf of them. So all this rare sugar work was started by my first student, Madhu MRD, who did all the work on the D sugars. Someshwar Sanpala was the second student who did work on the L sugars, and Anandrao Podilapu, he did the work on the trisaccharides I mentioned. All of them, they are settled abroad. So Madhu is now working in a vaccine company in Germany after finishing his postdoc in Max Planck. Somesh followed the same path. He's also in Vacillon now. Anandrao Podilapu, so these two worked with Peter Sieberger. He worked with Professor Nicolau, and then he's now working in Georgia with Professor M.G. Finn. Vikram Sarpe, who initiated all the work on trehalose, followed by Manish Kumar, who did work on the OSC molecule I showed you last. So Vikram did all the work initially and then Shantanu joined the team. They are the people, these two, who work on the trehalose glycoconjugate story that I told you about. I'm also grateful to all the collaborators and all the other people who are my other students who are working on other projects. And Archana, as I mentioned, Archana and Diksha Rai here, they worked on the recent paper that we published very recently on Staphylococcus aureus. And Shantanu is here, and all the other people. I'm very grateful to this wonderful team of people I'm privileged to work with. And last but not least, very important, I must thank all the funding agencies which have been generously supporting our work over the last 10 years or so. Once again, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present our work in this Green Chemistry Conference. And I thank all of you for your very patient listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kulkarni, for your knowledgeable words on green chemistry and carbohydrate synthesis, highlighting the regioselective aspects of many of the synthetic reactions of carbohydrate with broad biological activities. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Now, some questions are there.
I'll be glad to answer.
Yeah, sir. Some echo problem is there, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir, one question from Babli Rai. Sir.
Yeah, I am listening. Please go ahead.
Sir, she's asking, sir, I would like to know how did you protect all hydroxyl group using different functional group selectively?
Yeah, so it's a very nice question, and that's the heart of carbohydrate synthesis. So let's say if you're talking about monosaccharide sugars such as D-mannose, the primary hydroxyl group, which is at 6th position, has a higher reactivity. So you can selectively protect the primary hydroxyl group over the secondary hydroxyl group. Then you look at the other secondary hydroxyl groups, which are of similar reactivity. Then for that, you can take help of the syn disposition or the anti-disposition. So for the syn diol, you can use reagents which complex them from one side, such as tin, or such as copper, or such as boron, which hold them together and give you selectivity. And then you can mask the remaining. For trehalose, we were indeed lucky that we tried to find out a reagent that can directly mask 6 hydroxyl groups. So we use cyclohexyridine acetal to mask 6 hydroxyl groups. So that reaction, if you do under different conditions, if you don't do it on the rotor, you will get all the possible isomers and you'll get a mess. So you need to really optimize the conditions in order to get the selectivity. And then the remaining diol, the hydroxyl group which is closer to anomeric center is hydrogen bonded, and therefore it has a higher acidity. So you can do DCC coupling at that hydroxyl group without protection. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Nice. Now, second question from Jay Dinore.
Okay.
If there are so many natural catalysts available, why we are running towards the synthesis of heavy metal containing catalysts?
Yes, that's a very good suggestion. Indeed, here in this case, it is very difficult. Like you need some metal to coordinate the two nucleophiles. So of course, one can use these natural catalysts for doing glycosylation, and there are efforts going on in this direction where people are using organocatalysis by using natural product-like structures to get the selectivity. But in some cases where you have to hold two hydroxyl groups together, you need to go for metal catalyst. Or we can also use boron or copper. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you
very much.
So now, if there are no more questions, shall I remove the screen share?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, please go ahead. It is not allowing me to do anything. So can you please, now the next speaker is, please proceed.
1 minute.
No.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Now our next speaker is, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Now our next speaker is, now I would like to welcome and introduce Professor Samsam Gupta, sir, Department of Chemistry, ISL Kolkata. Professor Samsam Gupta did his undergraduate degree in chemistry from University of Kolkata, followed by his master degree from IIT Kanpur. He then moved towards United States of America, where he finished his doctoral degree from the Carnegie Mellon University at Pittsburgh. After two postdoctoral stints in US and Germany, he joined in National Chemical Laboratory Pune as a scientist in December 2006, where he was a senior scientist in the Chemical Engineering Division. He has recently moved to IISER Kolkata in 2016 as an associate professor to the Department of Chemical Sciences. He is an inorganic chemist by training, but work in the area of bioinspired catalysts and material. With this, I welcome Professor Samsam Gupta, sir, for his invited talk on bioinspired catalysis for sustainable future. Over to you, Gupta, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muskawar, and thank you so much, and thanks a lot to the organizers, Dr. Everybody who is here, Dr. Mishra, the principal, and so especially Suvarn for inviting me. So I'll sort of share my slide first. Let me make sure that my slide is getting shared. Yes, all good. Yeah. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm audible, right? My voice is audible.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thanks, Sure. Okay. So thank you very much. I'll give my lecture today, and it is wonderful that all the background of my lecture, and I actually thought that when Professor Chandrasekharan is there and he's going to talk about most of the background, and then Suvarn. And there was a question on why we don't use base metals for catalysis. So I think most of the background has been covered. So I have very few slides on those background, on about green chemistry. I'll come very quickly to basically what I want to talk about. Okay, so I think Professor Chandrasekaran covered this very beautifully, and this is what to me, and I made this slide even before I seen the talk. So to me, the most three important topics, and he said double E's, right? Energy, environment. So you can see safe energy and environment, which is pollution treatment, right? So the double E's, which Professor Chandrasekaran mentioned, is right here, and then a part of the third E, which was delivered in the last talk, which is chemical design and synthesis, and which Dr. Kulkarni wonderfully talked about how you can make very good and clean synthesis of carbohydrates, which are so important in vaccine development and so many other different things. Okay, so with this in background, I want to again sort of reiterate what Professor Chandrasekaran said quite elegantly for a little bit longer time, and I want to sort of reiterate this a little bit because that puts my talk into perspective. That even though chemists can just make molecules at will. You can see the molecules Suvarn makes, right? I will have a hard time even copying it out. They're so complex molecules, and they make such complex molecules. And if you give an organic chemist a target, and they can make any molecule you want. However, the processes, and as you could see here, the multiple protections, deep protections, in all this chemistry, which makes us very efficient. Unlike us, nature does it very linearly. The same complex carbohydrates would happen in nature using these wonderful enzymes, which do not need any protection, deprotection chemistry for most of the part, and they could sort of switch them at will. And so even though we have been wonderfully making compounds, at inherently our chemistry, chemical processes is still pretty inefficient, and this is sort of again touched upon by Professor Chandrasekaran, that sort of said by the E factor, and I'm glad that the E factor is discussed. I don't need to spend any time. So that's called the environmental factor. So imagine, and as we said, that when you make a chemical compound, right? So you make a compound, but imagine, when you make it in a lab, and the compounds you throw away, right? So you throw away the solvent. Of course, it's recycled quite a bit in the industry, but there are a lot of this waste made, and this waste have to be disposed, and they have environmental footprints. So all of these have to be considered when you look at how efficient a chemical process is. And you these days, with all these revolutions, with green chemistry at being in the heart, you cannot just dispose anything up. You have to treat them, you have to burn them, and then there are issues about CO2 emissions, you have to trap them. So it becomes a vicious cycle. So and that brings in all the environmental challenges. And the E factor, what talked about the environmental factor or the efficiency factor for fine chemicals, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today, is very high. So for every kilogram of environmentally API, which you call about, which is the main component of your drug. So for every kilogram you make, you sort of make 25 to 100 kilograms of waste. So that's where we stand now at these days. Now, even though you read these papers, these wonderful papers which talked about, very 5-step synthesis of this very wonderful artemisinin compound, which is an anti-malarial compound, and that's what the paper talks about, and you get very excited. You go and read them, and you then see actually it's 5 steps. But if you look at each step, if you look at very carefully at what we are talking about in each step, right? So it's my disappointer. So you see that, so all these what is being sort of used, right? Look at all these compounds, right? We have, so all these butyllithiums and palladiums, so imagine the amount of waste product you make, even though it's a 5-step synthesis. So again, it comes back to my heart that inherently processes are pretty inefficient. Okay. Now, so of course, this lays down to the fact that we need new and better methodologies. Okay, so better methodologies which can sort of make all these complex molecules more efficiently and more how much like the way nature makes. And that brings in to the next topic of mine, which I'm going to talk about, is that you need to develop new reactions. Okay, reactions which are typically not used by organic chemists now, like in a very widespread manner, but reactions are used by nature in the way they make these compounds so specifically. So we need to mimic nature, so we need to learn from nature and sort of develop these reactions which can help us make them in a more efficient manner. Now, one of the reactions, this is now a very topic which is talked in all organic chemistry conferences. I'm not an organic chemist, but I'm going to talk about it in my little way. Is the idea of functionalizing CH bonds. Okay, and I'm going to stick to mostly aliphatic CH bonds. And because these sort of CH bonds are a big challenge because the carbon and we can talk about it a little bit later. I'll just discuss why it is such a challenge. But functionalizing them is in a predictable, selective, and scalable manner, right? So you can make a reaction in a 10 milligram scale or a 1 gram scale, but that is not important, right? Because if you have to really make this into a process, you've got to scale this up in a ton scale. So you need a method which is predictable, scalable. That's what the challenge is. And so this is, this represents a really hard challenge is how to take, this hydrogen and functionalize it with X. Have little hydroxide, but it can be fluorine and it can be NH3, it can be any other molecule. That sort of remains a big challenge. And this is very significant because you have to understand that, all the raw materials we get, we sort of see as starting materials, all comes from petroleum. Okay. So you have petroleum, you have refining, you do thermal cracking, you get ethylene, propylene, you get aromatics. So you can see they're all hydrocarbons. Okay, and all your starting materials which you use in the lab, have all high oxidation carbon in higher normal oxidation state. So you have aldehydes and alcohols, and these are carbon in the higher oxidation state. So how do you get to a higher oxidation state? You have to oxidize it. Right? So a lot of industry is about taking all these starting materials like propylene and making propylene oxide. Okay, taking benzene and converting it into phenol. So oxidation is in the heart of the chemical industry. Especially with when you are working with sort of aliphatic hydrocarbons, this presents a huge problem. So one of the dream reactions which the industry really loves to do is make methanol from methane. Okay, and why this is an important reaction? In India, for example, from the Indian perspective, we don't have a lot of hydrocarbon gases, and countries like Iran and all have a lot of hydrocarbon gases. So it would be wonderful if we could have a gas pipeline from Iran coming into India, so we could have an access to all this gas. But there are geopolitical considerations which do not allow us because it comes from countries which are not very friendly with us. So the other way would be and you can't transport such high amount of volumes in tanks, right? Because you need a lot of high pressure. So the process would have been that you convert into methanol, so you convert into liquid, so that is now again transportable. But then the moment you try to do such kind of things, you get overoxidation. So methanol then becomes acid, and then overoxidation carbon dioxide because it is a thermodynamically downhill reaction. It's simple. It's very, very difficult to stop it. So as what I'm seeing is, so if you take propane and try to oxidize it, you get a mixture of them. So in oxidation chemistry, selectivity, again, I'm using the word selectivity because I'm going to use it pretty often. Selectivity is the heart of oxidation chemistry. It's one of the challenges you need to overcome when you're looking at oxidation reactions. Okay. Now, just to say again, go back, okay, to how nature does chemistry. So I talked about the challenges with normal chemical oxidation, which is done in an industrial scale. Now, imagine this molecule Taxol. So this is a natural product. Okay, it's an anti-cancer drug. A lot of you know this. Okay, now this is a natural product. So it's synthesized biologically by enzymes. Now, if I were to give the students who are listening to this, right? If I were to give you, if a teacher was to give you in your exam and tell, okay, can you draw a retrosynthesis of this compound? Okay, all you would do is that you would try to get, break them down into an aldehyde or a ketone or an epoxide, or you would sort of nucleophilic addition reactions, substitution reactions to build such kind of cores. Okay, so that's typical how organic chemistry does. But nature does not do it that. See, the way nature makes it, it makes it hydrocarbon core, okay, and then selectively oxidizes certain carbon atoms into the alcohols or the ketones. Now that is something, if you are given in the exam, you will never even think about, right? This is something as an organic chemist, those who do organic chemistry will not even think about it. And that is remarkable, right? So the way nature does it, we are always talking about mimicking nature. They do it in an incredible manner, in a very different manner than we traditionally do in organic chemistry. Another example is the taxane, and when this becomes the 6-deoxy becomes electrolyte, you have a hydroxylation right here, and this enzyme which we're going to talk about, cytochrome P450, does a wonderful reaction. Okay. Now, I talked about here that you put, this is not a drug, this is a drug. Okay, so imagine this and this is exactly similar. You hydroxylate at this position, only at this position, and this becomes a very potent antibiotic. And so I want to put this idea that late stage functionalization, and I'm going to stick to hydroxylation in this talk, can really change a lot of the properties. And I'll give you a few examples, okay? Like for example, look at this terpene. This is odorless. You don't smell anything. You hydroxylate here, it gives you a rose scent. Imagine this, right? Something, you don't even have to do an assay to find out how different it is. You can smell and see how different it is. This is orange flavor. You oxidize it here, okay, in this allylic position, and it becomes a grapefruit flavor, right? So you can imagine that why are they different? Because the receptors in your nose are different receptors are binding. So you can completely understand that just putting a small OH group can completely change the way it would bind to a biological target in the body. And so, so this one is a prodrug, okay? The hydroxylate is a prostate cancer treatment. So small molecule late functionalization becomes, is a very attractive proposition. Even though it's an attractive program, and we have others also, I'm going to skip that. Even though it's a very attractive proposition, and in the last 15 years, there have been several, papers, methods, catalysts which have been developed looking at, in a biomimetic manner. It's still not something which is very widely used and not something very scalable, And the heart of it lies, in the fact which you are taught in undergraduate colleges is the difficulty in activating a siege, okay? And I thought that because it's mostly an undergraduate population, who's going to listen to this, I'm going to take 2-3 extra minutes into discussing this out. So make sure that this time. So discussing this out. So this is, for example, if A is carbon, imagine this is your methane molecule, okay? And look at this methane. This is the MO of the methane molecule. So you have bonding electrons which are very low lying, and then you have anti-bonding electrons which are very high lying, right? So so that becomes a very difficult sort of to basically functionalize it, because carbon and hydrogen are very similar electronegativities, the orbital energies are very similar, and that makes it very, very, very challenging. So what you do, so what you learn in your undergraduate and in master's degrees, all the wonderful work they do with siege activation, all the Nobel Prize winning work like Heck, not exactly Heck, but of course Heck is a part of it, a sort of different version of it, but all these catalysts which sort of do siege activation, right, in which you activate siege bonds using low valent transition metal complexes, right? You have palladium 0 and rhodium war and all these wonderful low valent late transition metals, which does something called an oxidative addition. And the way you attack this problem is that, so you have, imagine this is hydrogen, for simplicity's sake. It's a bonding orbital, this is the anti-bonding orbital. So your metal comes in, and the metal has a vacant d orbital. So that vacant d orbital sort of can interact, okay, with your sigma bond, which is your lone pair. And then there's a back donation between the metal filled orbital into your, sigma star, which is unfilled in this case, okay? And that's what is, we teach as a Dirac and Duncanson model, in which you can sort of teach how, so you take electrons and you put electrons on, you put electrons in anti-bonding orbitals, the bond will sort of weaken down and then you break bond. So that is a very standard method. But this, we will not discuss it today, but this really doesn't work very well with saturated hydrocarbons. This works wonderfully with aromatic siege bonds, and that has been explored widely in literature, and that has been translated into different chemical processes which are being currently used. Now, the other way to sort of look at such kind of reactions is by doing radical reactions, okay? And this is known forever. It was known for a really long time, okay? And what is the idea? The idea is the following. So again, you have the methane here, the bonding orbitals. This is a CH bonding orbital. It's very strong. They're very bonding. Like the delta H is very low. They're very stable. Now you bring sort of an E dot, which is a radical, which is only one electron, and E dot would love to come, and sort of, it would like to come, and it would like to form EH. So it would like to pluck a hydrogen and form EH. And if this EH bond, okay, is very stable, this EH bond is very stable. So imagine, this is a CH bond. So E dot takes the electron from this and forms the EH bond. So this stabilization of EH, okay, makes it thermodynamically favorable to sort of break the CH bond and form the CH bond. And so that's a strategy, and so you have wonderful, and so if this EH bond is stronger, if it's more thermodynamically favorable than your CH bond, so it's a thermodynamically favorable spontaneous reaction. So traditionally, you have learned this chemistry. If you take radicals like chlorination reactions, take Cl dot, F dot, OH dot, okay? All these would react with aliphatic compounds because HCl, HF, OH, all these bond energies are stronger than normal aliphatic CH bonds, okay? Even dioxygen, okay, it can react, dioxygen will form water and it is an exothermic reaction. However, dioxygen does not spontaneously react with alkanes, and that is a thought I would like to leave the students with, and if somebody has a question, we can discuss this during question time, that why dioxygen, even though it's thermodynamically favorable, does not spontaneously react with hydrocarbons. Okay. So there are two ideas about hydrocarbons which I need to build up before I get into the green chemistry part, which I work on. And I will only tell a little bit about what we work because I need to put this into perspective, sort of explain why we do what we do. So as I said to you, that you need this radicals in which the HX form has to be stronger and has to be more thermodynamically favorable than the CH. In that way, the reaction is thermodynamically favorable. You can see that the delta H is this minus this, okay? So, the CH minus XH, that sort of difference brings it whether the reaction is favorable or not. Now, so as you have learned in organic chemistry, chlorination, hydroxy, this reaction, especially chlorination, they're extremely exothermic. On the contrary, bromination reactions, Br dot is much less exothermic, okay? And it has, again, as I said, it has all to do with the strength of this bond. As I said, the more the strong this bond is, the more this is lower. So you have two things, which is one is higher and one is lower. And if one is higher and one is lower, it's more exothermic. So the strength of the HX form will tell you how exothermic or endothermic it would be. So F dot and Cl dot will be exothermic reaction. While if you use Br dot, it would be an endothermic reaction. So bromination reactions, you have to heat it up in all likelihood, but chlorination and chlorination reaction using radicals would be spontaneous. Now, so we talked about the thermodynamics, but there's one more part which brings me to this original idea, that is the kinetics, which tells me about the selectivity. Because thermodynamics is only telling you about delta H, but the selectivity comes, okay, when we look at the kinetic parameters or the activation. And so this is an interesting thought because this brings me to the heart of my problem. What are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve the problem that oxidation reactions generally in the industrial scale are not selective, okay? And we have to understand why it is not selective and how nature makes it selective. So as chemists, how we can mimic nature and make them selective. That's the crux of my talk, okay, today, so we can have more cleaner way of doing reactions. Now, let's talk about the selectivity of F dot, Cl dot, and Br dot. Okay, so this is again a very classic physical inorganic problem. You see, if you use F dot, there is no select. So I'm talking about this molecule which has a primary CH bond and a tertiary CH bond. Okay, and so they are different. The bond strengths are different. That's roughly 5 kilocalories per mole difference. And if I look at the relative difference in reactivity, so you see for fluoride, there's not much reactivity difference between the 3 degree and the 1 degree. So they would functionalize it with equal E. So this is an unselective reaction. I use the word unselective reaction. In terms when you go to chloride, Cl dot, this would be a more selective reaction. And if you use Br dot, it's a much more selective reaction. So all you see is that the thermodynamic parameters, which is basically, how strong the HX bond is, the thermodynamic, it's a more vigorous reaction, it is less selective. So the thermodynamics and the kinetics sort of correlate, which you call the linear free energy relationship in physical chemistry. Okay, and so there is a nice correlation between that, and we can discuss this out. But the point of the matter is, what I want to leave you out with is that if you have, if after the radical which comes in, the HX bond form is very exothermic. If it has a very strong bond energy compared to the CH bond it is breaking, it will be non-selective. And precisely the reason industrial oxidations are non-selective because all of them are dominated by OH radicals. So OH radicals are formed here. And these OH radicals, when they pick up an hydrogen and form an OH bond, that is 119 kilocalorie per mole. This is even much stronger than HCl. Okay, this is similar to HF. So all this hydroxyl radical based oxidation in the industry are unselective because using this, what is being formed to do this functionalization are OH radicals, which forms OH bonds to form H2O, which are very exothermic. So you have, all these radical reactions developed by Barton and others. You have this Kharash and Schiff and Fenton, and you can see all these radical reactions lead to a variety of different products. You take this adamantane, and you can see the number of products which are being formed. So these are non-selective. So traditional radical reactions, even though they can be made spontaneous, okay, which is what you want, are typically non-selective. So the question comes in that the same oxidation nature does and makes it very selective. So that is the point I'm going to talk about, and then we'll finish up with how we sort of mimic our chemistry. So what does nature do? Okay, so I have, so I would have another 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm good on time. Okay, so you can see that nature uses an enzyme to do these oxidation reactions, and a lot of cases these enzymes contain iron. Somebody asked the question in the last talk that why don't we use transition metals like iron, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit, how important it is. And you can use iron to do all of these oxidations. Look at this molecule, this is camphor, right? And there are several CH bonds here, and you look at this hydroxylates only at one position, okay? And so that's what it makes it so exciting and so cool. Okay, and the way nature does it is because it doesn't have just the iron sitting somewhere, okay? So the iron is either bound in the active site by a cofactor. In this case, there can be cofactors like heme. So these are porphyrin molecules where the iron is sitting right in between. Okay, so these are heme molecules. Or they are bound to the side chain amino acids of proteins in the enzymes, and that's how they hold them. Okay, and that is essentially the way the iron is coordinated in these enzymes, okay, which sort of do this oxidation. So now the question is, okay, so so what does iron do? So that's the next question. Okay, so now let me talk to you about two examples here. I already talked about it. There's one enzyme called cytochrome P450, and look at this enzyme, cytochrome P450. You can see it selectively hydroxylates only one CH bond and exclusively, like 100% yield, okay, at that position. Selectivity is 100%, and sort of unbelievable, right? How does it do it, right? Because we have seen that oxidation reactions, like, are generally unselective, right? So how would it do it? So there are other enzymes like methane monooxygenase, right? Methane to methanol, a dream reaction. We can't even figure this out how to do it, and nature does it at room temperature, and we have, aromatic compounds being made into catechol, right? Naphthols, right? And these are reactions which are happening at room temperature with dioxygen as well. And I've already said dioxide does not react with aromatic organic compounds. And here you have an iron containing enzyme which is taking dioxygen and sort of doing all this sort of reaction. Okay. So here is the crux of what nature does. Okay. So again, we come back to our idea, okay, that the best, the most easiest way to functionalize CH bonds is to have radicals. Okay, so you have a radical which when plucks a hydrogen bond and forms an HX, and if that HX is more thermodynamically stable than your CH bond, the reaction is thermodynamically favorable. So now what enzymes do is, so this is suppose your enzyme, it takes oxygen, and of course there are other things which happen. It takes some electrons and some protons, and a couple of things more happen, okay, and it forms this metal oxide. And these are some examples of the metal oxides given. These are metal oxides, and these are metal oxides in which the metal is in a very high oxidation state. Iron in the fourth oxidation state or in the fifth oxidation state. So these are unusual oxidation. These are oxidation states which are not sort of regularly we encounter in our chemistry or in our inorganic class. So these form this very high valent oxidation states. Now, once you form this high valent oxidation states, these can sort of, these metal oxides can hydroxylate. Okay. Now I'll tell you how does a metal oxide hydroxylate a CH1. Okay, and so that's the next question I'm going to try to tell you. All what nature does is, okay, it replaces. So what I had said is, you have hydroxyl radicals. So till now we have said we have sort of hydroxyl radicals. Okay, so hydroxyl radicals will react with a CH bond. Okay, and you will form, okay, OH2 plus carbon with this, right? This is your typical reaction. Now all what it does is it replaces this hydroxyl radical, okay, with a metal oxide. Okay, this is sort of a rank. Okay, and as I said, OH will form. Sorry, I can do this better here, saying that it forms HOH. So there is a OH bond form, which I said is a HX, which is thermodynamic equivalent. In this case, this OH bond is formed. So iron oxide forms a OH bond, and the formation of this bond is what sort of is exothermic, and that's how it brings in selectivity. Now, how does making a metal oxide so different from a radical hydroxide? So the thing is, the OH bond, so the bond which we wrote here is 119 kilocalorie per mole. Okay, this is hammered in stone. You cannot change this. This is the fundamental law of nature. An OH bond is 190 kilocalorie. You cannot change it. So your CH bonds can vary from 80 to 100, right? And so the more weaker your CH bonds, the more exothermic it is, the reactions are more unselective. But in case of the metal oxide, you can vary the strength of this. This strength can be varied. You can vary the strength of this, okay? And you can vary the strength of this by using different things, by the oxidation state of the metal, right? If I have an iron in the fifth oxidation state, this OH bond form will be even more stronger. I can change the ligand environment. I can change the spin state. I can change the coordination geometry. So nature has a lot more tools available to vary this value, this value which we have talked about, and this value of this OH bond, which is sort of, which is formed upon the abstraction of the H dot. This is what, it brings the selectivity. If this bond is close to the CH bond, okay, then you have incredibly good selectivity. So, cyclohexane is 99 kilocalorie per mole, and this bond for cytochrome P450 is around about 101 kilocalorie per mole. So, and it can change depending on what substrate you want, and the enzyme changes, the coordination geometry changes. And so nature can have different coordination geometry, different spin states to sort of vary these and suit it to be close to the CH bond energy so that it imparts very high selectivity. And so that's how nature does. Now, this brings to the case that, I've already explained that you have this wonderful, metals, right? You have wonderful enzymes containing iron, okay, which does this wonderful oxidation reaction. And this is an interesting periodic table. It's called the periodic table of endangered elements. So these are elements, which have very limited resources in our planet, right? So, for example, all this wonderful heat activation chemistry which is done, which has won the Nobel Prize with palladium, and these are limited availability. You can see here limited availability. Future risk isn't supply, right? So you cannot really have a sustainable world with using chemistry with palladium, platinum, iridium, rhodium, ruthenium. These are in very limited supply. So these are not elements which are there in a lot with us, right? And because of limited supply, they're very expensive. So imagine this, right? So if I do the same chemistry with a 1 mole of, if I do a chemistry with iron, which costs me 1 rupee. If I do the same chemistry with platinum, it costs me 9 lakh, 10 lakh rupees, right? This is a little old. I think the prices are even more. So, so there's a case in which, so the goal, what everybody wanted to do, there's a group of people who really want to do is develop, like the enzymes I talked about, synthetic iron-based catalysts, which can do the same late-stage functionalization as enzymes like P450 does, in a manner in which it can be scaled and it can be mass-produced, right? So that's the general goal where we work on. And iron is a wonderful metal because iron is, it's abundant, right? It has a different oxidation states, okay? It's a little tricky because, Sometimes oxygen states vary between 3, 4, so it has a propensity of generating radicals, and we can talk about this. Somebody has a question, and it binds to all these different ligands like nitrogen, oxygen wonderfully, so you can develop a lot of ligands. And so this is the case of developing iron-based oxidation catalyst. So how do the biomimetic community work on this? So the first synthesize, okay, you have these heme molecules which are in the enzyme. So can we sort of take this heme cofactor out and try and see if we can sort of modify that and do oxidation reaction? So that's been done for a really long time. You had this tetraquinone porphyrins and you had this oxidants like iridosin benzene, but these are not very efficient, okay, not very selective, not very efficient. And because nature has developed heme because it has the protein cavity around it. The heme was evolved thinking there's going to be a protein cavity around it. If you don't have the protein cavity, when you bring the heme out, it loses all its function. So when you sort of mimic biology or enzymes, you just cannot just blindly copy. You got to understand the principles from it and then use those principles to make synthetic compounds which can mimic the function. Structural mimic is okay, but what you really want to make is have a functional mimic of these enzymes which can carry out these oxidation reactions. Okay. So again, I just would talk about it. We get to our work. So this is one, the iron heme, which has been widely used. So we have been working with this framework called the FETML framework, okay, which was developed by Collins and others, okay. And this framework, a big problem with this framework was this. Now, this framework, when you sort of put an oxidant to it, the iron oxos it would form, and especially the iron 5 oxo it would form, which is the catalytically important active species. This was a very unstable compound, and because it was an unstable compound, this compound did not show much catalytic activity. So one of the first things we tried to do in our lab was to understand why this is unstable. So we figured out that these two groups, these are CH3 groups around to it. So somehow during when we form this metal oxo species, this have a both conformation. So these CH bonds are close to the oxygen, and instead of the substrate, they react. So this iron oxo plucks up the CH bonds, okay. And when you pluck up the CH bonds, the catalyst decomposes, and you really don't get a catalytic return. So we modified a little bit, and we sort of put it into we developed what is called this biuret fragment, in which sort of we put this N group here, and that allowed us to make these high valent metal oxo. It's a very unusual iron 5 oxo. This is a second example of an iron 5 oxo with the same with an iron 5 oxo. And the most remarkable thing about it is that this was room temperature. So we could do a lot of different spectroscopy because we could not crystallize it. It's very difficult to crystallize. So we got, like, we have this EPR and MOSBAR, which tells about the oxidation state. We have the EPR, which tells about the spin state of the complex. Raman spectroscopy, which tells about the iron oxo bond, and mass spec, and all different methods. We collaborate with a lot of people across the world to understand this. And so because it formed all these wonderful metal oxo complexes, now with an oxidant which is sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach, and the byproduct of this reaction is sodium chloride, right, which is known to be non-toxic, right? So you have a complex, okay, and you use an oxidant as sodium hypochlorite, and now you have this adamantane, okay. It has a tertiary CH bond and it has secondary CH bonds. So these are secondary CH bonds, these are tertiary CH bonds, okay. And there are more secondary CH bonds than tertiary CH bonds, but still, it exclusively hydroxylates a tertiary CH bond with a selectivity of 110 times of that secondary CH bond, right? And so we sort of made this, and then we could really do make a lot of late stage functionalization of a lot of different molecules, and I'll tell you the mechanism of the reaction, for those who are interested, so the reaction mechanism is the following, so you have the iron oxo which is formed when you add an oxidant like hypochlorite to your iron 3 starting complex, and then when the hydrocarbon comes in, you have something which you call as a PCET reaction. It's called a proton coupled electron transfer. These are classically called hydrogen hat reactions, in which the proton, the hydrogen H plus, is transferred here to form the OH bond, and the electron here, the one electron goes to the metal center. So it's a PCET process. It's a concerted process, and once you have this, you have an iron 4 compound, and you have this radical, right? And now two things happen. In the first process, this is an iron 4. It's still very highly oxidizing. This collapses, this gets oxidized, the OH gets transferred. This is called a rebound mechanism, and you get the hydroxide, and this gives you extremely high selectivity. Other things, which is a very minor pathway in our system, is that this sort of comes out of the cage, and this depends upon substrate. And once it comes out, it's in solution, and if there is oxygen in your solution, it can react with oxygen, and that sort of gives rise to a little bit of unselective products. And so that is one how your unselectivity, non-selectivity comes. Okay. So and this is I think I'm okay. It's 12:41, so I'm right on time. I'm not going to do the last story. So what we have achieved is the following. This is an anti-malarial drug, RTBC. I have put red dots on all the different hydrogens which are present. Okay. Now, if as an organic chemist, if I told you in an exam to sort of do a functionalization on this, you would really want to do it here, because this hydrogen is the more acidic hydrogen, right? It's next to a next to a lactone here, so this is more hydrogen. So you would use a base, make it a R minus, and then you would do stuff, right? So that is typical organic chemistry would do. But with this methodology, which is biomimetic, we would address not the most acidic hydrogen, but the weakest CH bond, and the weakest CH bond is this tertiary CH bond here, and we could hydroxylate that, okay, selectively with keeping the rest intact, okay, in hydro. So that's sort of what's finished. Okay, so I'm going to skip the photosynthesis part, and I think I'm over time, okay, and so what I'm trying to tell you is that so iron is a very interesting metal, right? It's a base metal. It's a challenging metal, right? The late transition metals have an advantage that when you do an oxidative addition, the oxidation state always changes by 2. Okay, and when you have a oxidation state change by 2, you always start with the diamantic into the diamond. In iron, you have all this palamimetic species which has unpaired electrons and which do very funny things. So you need to really make the perfect ligands, and you need to really understand them really well. But with the correct ligand, iron does have the potential to rival palladium and rhodium, and that is what I call bioinspired. You should use metals which are readily available and cheap, and develop catalysts which can do a variety of reactions. I'll give you examples. This is the iron-based polymerization reaction. This is a paper which looks at nitrogen dinitrogen reduction. Okay, so we are looking at hopefully coming with a new iron age, which has iron complexes looking at very challenging catalysis. Okay, so yeah, so these are the students who have it's Munmun, Bashov, Shandipon, who had done the little bit of the work which comes from our lab. I just wanted to keep that minimum, because I think a little bit of background is more important, because I understand, I was told there's a lot of students here. Without the background, I think if we get into more complexity of our kinetics and our mechanism, I think that will be all lost. So I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Okay. So thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, sir, for your nice talk on bioinspired catalysis for sustainable future. One of the participants raised their hands for asking question. I'll unmute. Mahima Setia, can you ask your question? Are you there? Hello? Hello? Mahima Setia? I think she left, sir.
Okay.
Not a connection problem.
Okay.
So very nice talk, sir. Thank you very much for your valuable guidance.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's time for the vote of thanks. So for that purpose, I invite Dr. Madhuri Phade ma'am for a vote of thanks.
Madam, unmute your mic. Please unmute your mic.
Now it is okay, sir? Good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of organizing team, national webinar on latest developments in green chemistry, I, Dr. Madhuri Bhade, would like to present the vote of thanks to all who made this event successful and memorable. First of all, I would like to thank all the honorable speakers who shared their precious knowledge and spared their valuable time from their busiest schedule. Today, we are really very fortunate to have such legendary personalities with us. Thank you, Professor Chandrasekharan, for your great words of wisdom on chemistry for sustainable development. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Professor Kulkarni, for sharing your valuable thoughts on green chemistry in carbohydrate synthesis. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Professor Sen Gupta, for sharing your deep knowledge on bio-inspired catalysis for sustainable future. Thank you very much, Professor. I also extend my thanks to respected Principal Dr. Mishra sir for his constant motivation and constant support all the time. I am also thankful to Dr. Shiva Swarup, Regional Director, IGNO, Nagpur, and Professor Suvarna Kulkarni, Royal Society of Chemistry, West India Zone, for their collaboration and wholehearted support in organizing this fruitful national event. Thank you very much, sir. I am also thankful to Dr. Deepa ma'am for her support. And I am especially thankful to all the respected dignitaries and delegates from various colleges and universities for their overwhelming response and interest in this webinar. Your presence made the event a grand success. And I am also thankful to Professor Kavre, Dr. Chavan, Head Department of Chemistry, Dr. Muskawa, and all teaching and non-teaching staff members for their support. Thank you once again, all of you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, with the permission of chair, I declare that, just a minute, sir. Working, no? Shiva Swarup, sir. Shall we conclude, sir?
Yes, continue.
Okay, now with the permission of chair, I declare that this national webinar is over. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, bye.